Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today we're heading deep into the backroads, fields, and forgotten towns of rural Texas where the summer heat never really fades and the night air hums with things better left unseen. These are 20 True Summer Night. Encounters, real stories that happened when the sun dipped low. The porch lights flickered like warnings and something stirred just beyond the tree line. But before we begin, here's something unsettling. Most viewers make one big mistake: they watch, they get chills, and then they leave without subscribing. And when they do, they miss out on the most disturbing, grounded Texas horror stories we only share with. The ones who stick around. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because in rural Texas, summer doesn't end with the heat. It ends with what's waiting in the dark. Where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it? There? Drop it in the comments. Now settle in and listen closely. The night's just getting started. It was the kind of hot that pressed down on you like a punishment. No wind, no relief. The air in Rio Frio that summer didn't move, didn't breathe. Even the cicadas had given up screaming by mid-July. And yet every night right around 1 o'clock, that swing would creak. Just once or twice. Enough to wake you if you lived nearby. Enough to make you remember. The swing stood behind what used to be the Campbell place, a 2-bedroom house with warped wood siding and a porch held up by stubborn nails and ghosts. The yard was fenced with bent wire and rotted posts, and behind it stretched a slope that led to the edge of the Frio River. The swing was nothing special, a basic A-frame with rusted chains and a faded red plastic seat, the kind you'd buy from Sears 30 years ago, but folks in town said it hadn't been used in decades. Not since the girl. Her name was Emily, or maybe Emma. Nobody agreed on that part, which seemed odd considering the town was barely big enough to support one gas station and a cafe that opened when it felt like it. What they did remember, with unsettling clarity, was that the swing had been built for her. Her father installed it himself back in '94. He poured the concrete footings in the heat and double-knotted the chains to hold up his daughter, who was barely 6. He even painted the seat red because she liked the color of fire trucks. There were pictures of her on it, once smiling, toes pointed skyward, hair blown back by summer breezes. Then one Sunday afternoon, she disappeared. She'd gone down to the river, and they found her pink shoe snagged on a root near the shallows. The water wasn't deep, not enough to sweep anyone away unless they slipped just right. Hit their head, got caught beneath a rock. That's what they figured happened. That or something worse. They found her the next day a mile downstream, pale as chalk and tangled in willow roots. Her father moved away a few months later, just packed up and drove off. Never sold the place. Just left the swing standing. It should have rusted through by now. But it hadn't. I wouldn't have believed any of it if I hadn't taken the job that summer. My name's Joel, and back in 2011, I was a summer caretaker for properties out around the Frio, mostly houses owned by snowbirds or absentee landlords. The Campbell place was on my list. Every Friday, I was supposed to check the foundation, the lock, look for animal damage, stuff like that. They paid me to walk through an empty house once a week and make sure it was still falling apart at a manageable pace. The first few visits were uneventful. Door was stiff but unlocked. The place smelled like old wood and mildew. Nothing moved, nothing missing, just stale silence and occasional rat droppings. I barely noticed the swing. It was out back past the brittle grass and a patch of old gravel, shaded by a pecan tree that hadn't borne fruit in years. It was always still when I saw it. Always perfectly still. Until the third Friday, I'd gone around the back like usual, noting a loose shutter and a new crack along the window frame. When I looked over toward the swing, I saw it move. Not violently, just a soft back and forth. Sway, like someone had just hopped off. There was no wind. Not even a breeze. The trees didn't stir. The dry grass didn't ripple, but the swing creaked slow and steady. I stared at it for a long time, and eventually it stopped. Just stopped. I didn't report it. Seemed like nothing. Metal loosens, maybe it caught a draft. But then it happened again the next week. And the week after that. One night I decided to check on it after hours. I'd been drinking with friends in Leakey and figured I'd swing by the Campbell place on the way home. It was just past midnight. I parked on the gravel shoulder, walked through the brittle field with my flashlight bouncing off dry ground and empty windows. I stood there looking at the swing, waiting for it to move, and it did. Right at 1:04 a.m., a slow creak. Then another. The chains flexed, the seat shifted. I froze. It wasn't windy. It was sweltering, dead still, like the whole night was holding its breath. And then I heard something I still can't explain. Laughter. Not loud. Not malicious. Just a child's giggle, faint and high, the way kids sound when they're trying to keep a secret. It came from near the swing, but there was no one there. My mouth went dry. I shined the flashlight across the yard, half expecting to see some prankster, some teenager crouched in the grass. But there was nothing, just the swing moving. Just that faint giggle in the dark. I backed away, fast. Drove off with my headlights. Still pointed toward the house and didn't sleep that night. I told myself it had to be something logical, an animal maybe, or just sound bouncing weird across the water. But the next morning, I found my voicemail full. There were 7 messages, all blank, each one 13 seconds long. All time-stamped between 1:05 and 1:12 a.m., the number was unlisted. I stopped going to the Campbell place at night, started doing my inspections during daylight. But even then, I noticed strange things. The swing would be tilted slightly, like someone had just leaned their weight into it. Once I found small footprints in the dust near the base. Too small for an adult, barefoot, toes pointed toward the house. I asked an older guy in town, Tom Rusk, about the Campbell place. He ran the hardware store and knew everyone's business. When I mentioned the swing, his eyes darkened. "You hear it too?" he asked. "Hear what?" "The laugh." He told me people had been hearing it for years, mostly in summer, always at night. A soft creaking and then a child's voice, sometimes laughing, sometimes humming. Once, a couple camping near the river packed up at 3 in the morning because their dog wouldn't stop barking at the tree line. Said they saw something swing itself in the dark, though nothing cast a shadow. The stories piled up. A rancher said he caught the laughter on tape once while walking his land. A woman said her daughter came back from playing near the river talking about the girl in the red seat who asked if she wanted to swing too. I started recording every time I went, but the tapes were always blank, dead air, except once. And that's why I finally quit. It was late August. Last visit before the property got handed over to a new manager. I brought my recorder again, left it running while I checked the crawl space. When I got home, I played it back expecting more of the same. But at 1:06 a.m., just as I was outside, the static shifted. It crackled, then cleared, and I heard a voice. "I don't want to go back in the water." It whispered. That was it. I still have that tape. Haven't played it in years, but I keep it in a box with old photos and keys I can't remember the locks for. Some nights I dream about that yard, about the way the swing moved without wind, and I wake up with that laugh still ringing in my ears. If you ever find yourself driving through Rio Frio on a hot July night, roll your windows up, don't stop, near the old Campbell house. And whatever you do, don't answer your phone after midnight. If you hear a giggle or a creak, just keep driving. Because the girl in the red seat never really left. She's still swinging, still waiting. They said she was barefoot, crying, asking for her father. That's what folks in Sabinal whispered whenever the story came up again. Usually after dark, usually with a bottle halfway empty and a dog barking in the distance. It wasn't the crying. That stuck with people. It wasn't even the fact that she appeared at over a dozen trailers scattered across that stretch of hill country west of Uvalde. It was the timestamp, every single one. Every damn knock happened at 2:13 a.m. on the dot, no matter the distance, no matter the camera angle. Every trailer, same time. Same girl. It started with Walt Jensen, a retired oil worker living alone, in a dented silver trailer at the edge of a mesquite thicket. He was up late watching reruns, waiting for the static in his chest to settle. Doc said it was nerves, but Walt knew better. He heard a knock. Not urgent, just soft. 1, 2, 3. Like a kid too shy to ask for help but desperate enough to try. He opened the door. No one there. Then he heard crying, low and hollow like it came from deep in the woods. A girl's voice. Daddy? That was it. No footsteps. No leaves crunching. Just silence, except for the soft whimpering that faded. Like smoke, Walt checked his cameras in the morning. The timestamp, 2:13 a.m. A small girl, maybe 8 or 9, shoulder-length hair matted and dark. Dress ripped at the hem, no shoes. She stood at his steps, knocked 3 times, looked straight into the camera, and mouthed something. He couldn't tell what. Then she was gone. No walking away. Just their one frame, gone the next. He told his neighbor Marcia, who checked her own Ring doorbell. Same time, same girl, same knock. But Marcia's place was 5 miles down the road. That's when people started talking. Within a week, 8 trailers reported the same thing. Some had footage, some didn't. A few claimed they opened the door and saw her. Others said the crying was all they got. But everyone agreed. The knocks came at exactly 2:13 a.m., and the girl always asked the same thing. Where's my daddy? Deputy Rick Sandoval took it seriously at first. He canvassed the neighborhood, reviewed footage, made a map. But the map didn't make sense. The girl would have had to cover miles of scrubland, barbed wire, dry creek beds, and cactus in a single moment. And not a single trail. No footprints. No tire tracks. No one saw her coming or going. It wasn't physically possible. The town's preacher, Reverend Cole, called it a test of faith. Others said it was a hoax, a prank pulled by someone with a drone and too much time. But even the prank theory didn't sit right. Some of the trailers didn't have power or cameras. Old-timers off-the-grid types. Still, they heard the knock. Still, they heard the crying. Then things got worse. The first to go was Billy Ray, a Vietnam vet with a limp and a shotgun always resting on his lap. When the knock came on his trailer, he didn't open it. Said the girl didn't seem right. Said her voice had too much echo for being so close. But the next night, he went outside anyway, beer in hand, flashlight swinging, grumbling about kids, messing around. He never came back inside. His body was found 2 days later, face down in a dry creek bed, hands covering his ears, mouth frozen mid-scream. No signs of trauma, no marks, just fear. That deep, paralyzing fear etched into every line of his face. A week after that, the town had a meeting at the VFW Hall. They debated curfews, patrols, even bringing in help from Uvalde. But there was no evidence, just stories, just fear. And something about fear, once it settles in a small town like Sabinal, it roots deep. Folks started leaving porch lights on. Some stayed up all night, others taped crosses to their doors. But still, the knocks came. Always at 2:13, always soft. Always 3.1 night, A local teacher, Ms. Trudy Valenzuela, decided to stay up and record. She set up 2 cameras, one inside, one outside, and waited. At 2:13, there was a knock. She flinched, but didn't move. On the footage, the girl appeared, but something was different. This time she wasn't crying, she smiled. A slow, too wide grin that stretched in a way no child's face should. Her eyes were black, not like dark brown or shadowed, but black like wet obsidian. The footage ended with a loud bang. Trudy was never seen again. Her trailer door was found torn off the hinges. The cameras were fried, wires melted. The only thing left inside was her recorder. It had one clip. Just 3 words whispered over and over again, "Where's my daddy?" That's when folks stopped checking the cameras. People started leaving. First the ones with kids, then the loners. By fall, half the trailer sat empty, porches sagging, grass grown wild. The knocks kept coming, though fewer and farther between. Those who stayed never opened their doors after dark. One man even bricked his shut. Didn't matter. He died in his sleep, eyes open, mouth wet with blood. Reverend Cole finally broke the silence. He said the girl was no ghost, no spirit. She was something older. Something that mimics the lost and grieving to worm its way inside. He believed she'd once been real. Maybe a missing girl from decades past, abused, abandoned, left to die in the woods around Sabinal. Maybe her spirit got twisted. Maybe it wasn't her at all. Maybe something found her pain and wore it like skin. He tried an exorcism, lit candles, prayed all night in the empty VFW hall. When they found him, his fingernails were gone, scraped off on the inside of the window glass, like he'd been trying to get out. His eyes were burned black, sockets dry. The only thing left unbroken was the candle at the center of the room. It still flickered. And under it, scrawled in ash, 2:13. After that, no one talked much. The town didn't die overnight, but it faded. Trailer after trailer was sold for dirt or burned. Nobody wanted the land. Even the oil companies stopped poking around. Now Sabinal's just a name on a green highway sign. People drive through it and wonder why there are no lights, no gas stations, no noise, but sometimes, only sometimes, when someone parks to rest or gets turned around, they hear it. A knock, 3 soft taps on the glass. A little girl, barefoot, dress torn, standing in the darkness, lips trembling, and if you check the time, it's always 2:13. The porch light had been acting strange for days before it turned into something worse. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of late summer evening that still clung to a sweaty warmth even as the sun dipped behind the hills that rimmed Harper. Dust rolled lazily down the gravel roads, cicadas screamed from the trees, and Thomas Greer stood on his front porch wiping sweat from the back of his neck while cursing quietly at the flickering bulb overhead. The damn thing wouldn't stay off. He'd flip the switch inside, and it would go out only to buzz and flicker to life again after a few seconds. He figured maybe the switch was faulty or the wiring. The house was old, inherited from his father and his father before that. Repairs were always lurking in its bones. He unscrewed the bulb that night just to be sure. Took it right out of the fixture. But as he stood in the dark, proud of his fix, the light blinked on again without the bulb. Thomas stared up at the socket, eyes adjusting, certain he was just seeing the reflection of a neighbor's floodlight, or maybe a car turning on Ranch Road 783 down the hill. But the glow was steady, cold, too bright for anything he could explain. The light disappeared after a minute. He stood frozen for longer than that. The next day, he cut the power to the porch, entirely from the breaker box in the utility room. Just flipped it off and even labeled it with a bit of masking tape. That night, He sat with a beer on his recliner, waiting to see if the thing would flare up again. At first, all was quiet. No light, just the usual hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional gust of wind shaking the live oak branches outside. He was halfway through an old rerun of Walker, Texas Ranger, when a pale beam spilled across the front yard, illuminating the porch railings and the cracked concrete steps. Thomas stood up slow, walked to the front window and peeled back the curtain. The porch light was on again, but the fixture didn't look right anymore. It was glowing brighter than any normal bulb ever could, almost blue-white, and it was casting shadows, deep ones. Wrong ones. He squinted harder and saw it wasn't just the porch bathed in that light. A figure stood beneath it, still, just there, leaning ever so slightly toward the window, watching. He froze, hands still gripping the curtain, trying to make out the shape. Couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. Couldn't even tell if it was human. Something was off in the way it stood, like it was hanging or strung up and just twitching in place. He didn't open the door. Didn't move for what felt like hours. Just stood behind the curtain and stared until the light flickered once and went out. And when he dared to look again, the porch was empty. That night, he didn't. Sleeped out the following morning, he tore the entire fixture down. Removed the casing, wires, mount everything. Took a crowbar to the old socket. Left a gaping hole in the soffit where it used to be. He tossed the whole mess into the fire pit and burned it. Stood there as the metal hissed and cracked and the smell of scorched wiring filled the air. He thought that would be the end of it. But when night came, the light returned. Not just a soft glow, but full brightness, almost buzzing with static, like an arc lamp. And standing beneath it again was the figure. Only this time it wasn't outside the window. It was right up against it. Thomas dropped to the floor and crawled backward into the kitchen, heartbeat hammering, ears ringing. He grabbed the shotgun from the cabinet, flicked the safety off, and inched back toward the front of the house. But when he reached the window again, the light was gone. So was the figure. The next morning, he found footprints on the porch. Long, bare, damp, though there hadn't been rain in 2 weeks. The boards creaked under his feet like they were swollen with water. He touched the wood, it was wet. He thought about calling the sheriff, but what would he even say? The porch light I removed keeps turning on and something keeps standing in it. They'd send someone out from Kerrville with a wellness form and a half-polite suggestion to get his head checked out instead. Thomas bought heavy blackout curtains, nailed them up over every window, and stopped going outside after dusk. The light still came. He could see its glow seeping around the edges of the curtains, stretching across the ceiling like creeping vines. Every night it stayed on a little longer. Every night, he heard soft tapping first on the walls, then the windows, then the door. One night, the power in the entire house went out. Every breaker flipped. He lit candles, sat in the hallway, shotgun across his lap, and waited. Hours passed. The silence was so thick it made his ears ring, and then the doorbell rang. He hadn't even remembered he had a doorbell. It hadn't. Worked in years. It rang again. Longer this time. He didn't move, didn't breathe, and then the knocking started. A single slow pound, then another. The sound shook the wood frame. Again, each knock heavier than the last, until the whole house seemed to shake in rhythm. He screamed and fired through the door. The knocking stopped. When morning came, he opened the door and found nothing. No shell casing, no damage to the wood. No mark at all. The only thing on the porch was a bulb. A single glowing porch light bulb spinning slowly in place where the fixture used to be, suspended mid-air. He slammed the door, locked it, boarded up every window after that. Days passed. He lost track of them. No phone, no TV. He ate from cans and didn't sleep. Sometimes the light would fade by morning. Other times, it stayed burning, even into the afternoon. Always waiting. Always humming. It wasn't until the night he found the basement door open that something truly changed. The house didn't have a basement. At least, it wasn't supposed to, but there it was, a stairwell leading down. He didn't build it. His father didn't, but it looked older than the foundation. The wood was hand-carved, the walls lined with stone. From deep within, the glow of that same unnatural light flickered like a heartbeat. He should have left. Should have run, but the light pulled at something. Not just fear. Recognition. He descended the stairs, shotgun clutched tight. Each step groaned under his weight. The air grew thick, damp, electric. At the bottom, he found a door, heavy, iron. The light shone through the gaps. He pushed it open. The room was empty, except for the figure. It was standing in the far corner, facing the wall, long-limbed. Its skin looked like it had never seen the sun. White, almost translucent. It turned as if it had been waiting, and in its face, Thomas saw himself, not as he was, but as he'd been, as a child. The way he looked in those old family photos from the porch, before his father started drinking, before the nights filled with shouting, before his mother disappeared without a note. The boy, his younger self, smiled, and then the light burst. Pure white. Neighbors found the house abandoned days later. Doors open. Food rotting. Not a sign of Thomas anywhere, but every night since. Then the porch light comes on in Harper. There's no bulb, no power to it, just a glow. Cold and steady. And if you drive by slowly enough, just after sunset, you might see someone standing beneath it. Watching, waiting. And if they wave, don't wave back. Just keep driving. Because once that light finds you, it doesn't let go. The fire had been burning steady for hours, a quiet crackle under the star-stuffed sky just west of Junction, Texas. It was one of those humid summer nights where the river smelled like algae and sweat, and the cicadas wouldn't shut up. We'd pitched camp by the South Llano, not far off the trail but hidden enough from the park rangers. 5 of us, me, Clay, his cousin Mason, Joel, and Katie, who brought more beer than sleeping bags. We weren't kids, not anymore, but we still liked pretending we were lost in the wild, just for a night or two. Clay had grown up in Junction. He said he knew the area like the back of his hand, swore we wouldn't see another soul out there. This stretch? He told us earlier, dragging logs in place for the fire. Ain't nobody comes out here this time of year. Too hot, too many snakes. By midnight, we were full of cheap brisket sandwiches and buzzed just enough to laugh at Joel's bad ghost stories. Katie was poking at the fire with a stick when Mason saw him first. Just outside the firelight. Standing there, still. No crunch of boots or brush, just there. "Hey," Mason called. The guy stepped forward. Wore a dark, beat-up parka like he hadn't noticed the heat. Jeans with mud caked halfway to the knees and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face even though the moon was damn near full. He didn't say a word. Didn't look scared or tired or thankful. Just eased himself down onto the rock closest to the fire, right next to Joel, and started warming his hands like he belonged. We all looked at each other, then back at him. "All right, man," Clay asked. "You lost or something?" The stranger didn't answer, didn't even blink, just kept watching the flames. "Maybe he's deaf," Katie whispered. "Or high," Joel added. We let it go for a while. Passed the bottle of bourbon around, figured maybe he'd talk when he was ready. But he never did. And the longer he sat there, the more the silence thickened. You know that feeling when the forest goes quiet all at once? Like the trees are holding their breath? That's what it felt like. The cicadas stopped. No frogs, no wind, just fire and the man's stiff shadow against the stones. I remember noticing his boots didn't have any laces. Just old black leather, split at the seams, and they were dry. Bone dry. Even though the river was 10 feet away and the dew had started to collect on everything. His hands looked wrong too, pale, almost gray under the flickering light. Long fingers, a little too thin. He never looked up, not once. Clay leaned toward me. I don't like this. Let's ask him to leave, Mason said, quieter than I'd ever heard him. Maybe when the fire dies down, Katie murmured. Let him warm up a bit. He's not hurting anybody. But something about the man felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. My skin prickled, like a warning. Not fear, more like recognition. Like I'd seen this before in a dream, or worse, like I hadn't and should have. Then the fire popped loud and a chunk of burning wood cracked open. Everyone flinched. Everyone except him. He didn't even twitch. Joel finally snapped. All right, look, who the hell are you? The man didn't answer. Just tilted his head slightly, like he was listening for something in the woods. That's when I realized I couldn't hear the river anymore either. It was maybe 20 feet away, and it always made some noise. But now nothing. Like the whole world outside that ring of fire had gone mute. Katie stood. Okay, screw this. I'm going back to the tent. She hadn't taken more than 2 steps when the man turned his head. Just a fraction. And the firelight caught his face. His eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. I don't mean like empty or cold. I mean literally nothing. No shine, no reflection. Just hollow black pits like burnt sockets. And his mouth, it opened. Just enough to see that there weren't any teeth. Just smooth gums. Gray and wet. Katie stopped. Didn't scream. Didn't speak. Just stared. I tried to stand, but my legs locked up. Clay swore under his breath. Mason whispered something like a prayer. And then the fire flickered low, like it had suddenly run out of air, and the flames turned blue for a second. Just a flicker. But that was enough, because in that brief pulse of unnatural light, his shadow stretched impossibly far behind him, curling like smoke into the dark. I swear I saw fingers in that shadow, dozens of them, clawing into the earth. Then the fire went out. Completely. And so did he. No sound. No movement. Just gone. Joel clicked on his flashlight, hands shaking. The rock where the man had sat was still warm. But he wasn't there. No prints in the dirt. No trail in the grass. Just 5 of us, blinking into the dark, breathing like we'd run a marathon. We packed up and left right then. Didn't even bother folding the tents. Clay drove us back in silence, headlights cutting through the fog that hadn't been there earlier. When we got back to town, Joel was the first to speak. I think I've seen him before. We all looked at him. Back in high school, he said, there was this story about a hiker that froze to death in the hills in '86. Tried to find his way back to town during a cold snap in January. They say he was found sitting by an old fire pit, eyes gone, mouth frozen open. Clay nodded slowly. My uncle used to tell that story. Said they buried the guy, but sometimes folks still see him, especially campers. I asked, why? Clay didn't answer right away. Then, softly, because he never got warm. We never talked about it again. Katie left town a month later. Mason stopped camping. Joel drank more than usual. Clay pretended nothing happened, but I know he hasn't gone near the South Llano since. As for me, sometimes I light a fire out back when the nights get too quiet, just to see, just to check. And once, last winter, I thought I saw a shadow, sitting across from me, just for a second. Hands out, waiting for the warmth. I let the fire die down slow that night. Real slow. Didn't want to leave anything unfinished. It started the summer after his mother passed, when the air in Inez grew thick and damp and the creek behind the house seemed to breathe. Caleb was 16, gangly, quiet, a little too old to be scared of the dark but too young to not feel its weight. His father had gone hollow after the funeral, still working the ranch during the day, but falling silent at dusk like someone had flipped a switch inside him. So Caleb was mostly alone, especially after midnight. That's when it began. Voice came at 2:13 a.m. sharp, every night. First it whispered his name soft, broken like wind sliding through reeds. Caleb. Just once, just enough to twist his stomach and raise the hairs on his arms. It came from the direction of the creek, which slithered a few hundred feet. Behind the property, winding through thick brush and willow trees. That creek had always felt strange, even when he was a boy. His mother used to say it was older than anything else around here, older than the dirt even, like it had a memory of its own. The first few times, Caleb told himself it was just the wind. The house creaked and moaned in the night, and the cicadas screamed loud enough to fool your ears. But the voice wasn't like that. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. It said his name like it knew him, like it wanted something. He didn't tell his father. That man hadn't looked him in the eye since the casket was lowered. Besides, what could he say? That the creek was talking to him? That it was calling him closer each night? Weeks passed. The voice grew bolder, louder, closer. One night, Caleb heard it from just beyond the tree line. Another night, it was at the edge of the porch. Always 2:13 a.m., always the same voice. Until one night it changed. That night, the voice didn't. Just whisper it sang, a lullaby, soft, melodic, worn with time. It was the song his mother used to hum when he was sick or scared. She would brush his hair with her fingers and hum the same 4 lines, over and over until he drifted to sleep. Caleb sat bolt upright in bed, his skin ice cold despite the heat. Caleb, the voice crooned, sweet boy. Come on out, baby. I'm waiting. It was her, or at least it sounded like her. But she was buried 6 feet under in a plot by the churchyard, under a cedar tree that bled sap like tears. He didn't sleep that night. Just sat in his room, staring at the window, his fists clenched so hard they trembled. When the morning light finally bled into the horizon, he walked down to the creek. It was muddy and slow, the surface still as glass. No footprints. No broken branches. Just the old swing hanging limp from a cottonwood tree, the one his mother used to push him on. He tried to forget it. Told himself it was grief, guilt. Maybe he wanted to hear her so bad his brain was twisting in the night. But it didn't stop. Every night at 2:13, the voice returned. Some nights it was barely a whisper. Other nights it was full of ache and sweetness, like his mother had never left. It told him things only she could know, memories from when he was little, secrets they shared when she was sick. It begged him to come outside, to come home. She missed him, she said. She was just beyond the creek. Just a little further. The pull was unbearable. He started sleepwalking. Twice, he woke up on the back steps. Another time, he was barefoot in the wet grass, 1 foot already past the fence. The final time, he found himself standing in the creek, knees deep in that slow, sucking water, shivering and confused, the voice echoing inside his skull like it had burrowed in. His father noticed. Not the voice, but the rest how Caleb grew. Pale, gaunt, withdrawn. How his nails were packed with mud. How his shoes were always damp. One evening, after supper, his father sat across the table and said, "You're hearing her, aren't you?" Caleb froze. "I used to hear her too." The old man continued, voice rough like sandpaper. The first year after she passed, only at night. Only by that cursed water. That creek's not right. Ain't never been. You remember them dogs went missing? Or how we found that neighbor girl in '03 drowned without a mark on her? It's not just water out there, son. It wants, it mimics, it learns. Why didn't you tell me? Caleb asked, because once you hear it, it's too late. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat with a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a Bible his mother gave him when he was 9. The voice came anyway. It didn't ask this time. It commanded, Caleb. He covered his ears, but the sound was inside his skull. He felt it rattle his bones. The house shook. Glass cracked in the windows. He saw a shadow stretching along the walls. Even though the light was on. Then came the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow. Wet. A hand slapped the window. He screamed. His father burst in seconds later. Shotgun in hand, eyes wild. They didn't see anyone outside. No footprints. No broken boards. But the creek was rippling like something had just slipped beneath. After that, his father nailed shut the back doors and windows, sprinkled salt along the thresholds, hung crosses on every wall. He told Caleb to never answer it, never speak back, never go outside after midnight. And for a while, it worked, until the storms came. Late July brought 3 nights of brutal lightning and rain. Power went out. Wind shredded branches. On the 3rd night, the house went silent again at 2:13 a.m., and the voice returned, louder than it had ever been. Caleb, I'm so cold. You left me. Come home, baby. It wasn't just outside anymore. It was in the hallway. He got out of bed, dizzy and barefoot, drawn like a puppet on strings. The voice kept calling, softer, closer. When he reached the living room, he saw her, his mother soaking wet, shivering, pale as milk. She stood near the front door, dripping on the floorboards. Her dress was the one she was buried in. Her eyes were dull, glazed like glass marbles. But her smile was warm, familiar. That was the worst part. I missed you. Baby, she whispered. Caleb's hand reached for her without thinking, and then his father's voice, screaming from behind him. A flash, a boom, the shotgun. The woman, or whatever it was, let out a shriek so inhuman it made Caleb's nose bleed. It flew backward, not like a person but like a mass of smoke and hair and teeth, twisting as it slammed through the door and vanished into the night. His father stood, panting behind him. It ain't her, he said. It ain't ever her. They moved 2 days later. They never spoke of it again. But every once in a while, when Caleb's lying awake in some other place, in some other town, he wakes up at exactly 2:13 a.m. and he hears her again, calling, closer. It started just after dusk, when the sun had dipped low behind the mesquites and oaks, and the sky over Nixon turned that deep copper color like blood in water. Louis Baird was finishing up with the hay bales near the west end of his property, just a few yards from the old barn that hadn't held animals in 20 years. He'd been living alone since Marnie passed 3 winters ago, and though the barn hadn't served much purpose lately, he always kept it locked. Not for safety, really, more for habit. Something about creaking hinges and shadows made him uneasy about leaving it open at night. That, and the sound he'd sworn he'd heard in there one evening last fall. But he'd written that off as wind through a busted plank. He noticed the van when he came back around the fence line, white, long, a little beat up, like the kind used by traveling salesmen or drifters. No branding, no bumper stickers. Parked about 10 feet from the barns. Side, half shrouded by the growing darkness. The weird thing was, it hadn't been there earlier when he started work. He was sure of it. and it didn't make sense for a vehicle to show up on his property unless someone had jumped the gate or driven around from the north pasture, which was all fenced in tight. He walked slowly toward it, pitchfork still in hand, just in case. The first thing he noticed up close was the lack of a license plate, not even a broken bracket where one might have been. The second was the warmth radiating off the hood, like it had just been running, not idling, driving. It was the kind of warmth that felt lived in, like someone had just stepped out to stretch their legs. Except there were no footsteps leading to or from the driver's side door, not on the dry dirt, not in the tall grass. Only one kind of mark surrounded the barn, a wide pattern of boot prints or what looked like boots circling it. Once, then twice, then again. 6 full times around, like someone had been walking laps, pacing, or maybe watching the building from every angle. But again, no tracks leading away. He hollered, just a cautious, "Hey," like he didn't want to scare anyone, but also didn't want to sound too inviting. Nothing came back. No movement inside the van. No rustling from the barn. Just a hot breeze and the smell of mesquite and sun-baked metal. The kind of smell that hits you in your teeth. He waited a while longer, watching the van like it might breathe. Then he reached out and touched the driver's side window. Cool, tinted black. Couldn't see a damn thing inside. He tried the handle, locked tight. Walked around the back, thinking maybe it was a joke or some teenager trying to scare the old man. But the longer he stood there, the less it felt like a prank and more like something had been placed here. On purpose. Like someone had meant for him to find it. When he circled back toward the front, he noticed something else. The barn door was open just a crack. Just enough to catch the light from the porch 100 feet off. He knew he'd closed it earlier. He always did. The lock, an old iron hook and eyes screwed into the frame, dangled freely, swinging a little in the breeze. It hadn't been forced, just UNHOOKED.now. Lewis wasn't a paranoid man. He'd fought in the Gulf, come home, raised a family, paid off a mortgage. He knew the difference between danger and shadows. But something about this van and that open barn stirred something deeper than fear. A kind of unease that made your bones feel too loose in your skin. He went back to the house, locked the door, got his shotgun, came back out with a flashlight in a trembling hand. The van hadn't moved, still no sound, still no sign of life. He stepped carefully toward the barn, listening. The flashlight beam shook a little, but it caught the edges of dust motes swirling in the air, like the barn was exhaling. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside was just as he'd left it, mostly. Old hay bales, broken tools, a rusted trough, cobwebs thick as sheets. But something had changed. The floor near the center, where the dirt was softer from years of animals bedding down, looked disturbed. Dug up, shoveled maybe, or clawed. A shallow pit, maybe 3 feet across, like someone had started digging and stopped halfway through. At the edge of it lay something dark, not black exactly, but the color of dried blood. He didn't approach it. Couldn't. Instead, he backed out, slowly, closed the door again, hooked it this time, walked back to the van, hand clenching the shotgun stock so tight he could feel the wood splinter. Then he did something he probably shouldn't have, something no one in his right mind would have done after seeing all. He opened the van's side door. It wasn't locked. It slid open without resistance, like it had been waiting. Inside was empty. Or at least it looked that way at first. But the smell hit him hard. Coppery, old, and wet. Like blood. And something else. Something sweet and rotting. The kind of smell that makes your throat close. He shone the light in. No seats. Just a long metal floor lined with scratch marks. Deep, ragged scratches that ran from front to back as if something had been dragged inside, or had tried to get out. On the far wall, drawn in what looked like soot or maybe grease, were 6 crude symbols. Circles, crosses, something that looked like an eye, and beneath them, scrawled in small, frantic letters, "Let IT rest. Do not open." He slammed the door shut, backed away, stumbled actually, ran inside, called the sheriff. When they arrived 2 hours later, the van was gone. Not just driven off, gone. No tire tracks, no burned rubber, no prints. Even the footprints around the barn had been erased, as if someone had swept them away with a giant broom. The barn? Still locked, still quiet, still holding whatever had been buried and disturbed. Lewis tried to explain it all. The deputies listened, nodded, took notes, promised to keep an eye out. But nothing ever came of it. The next morning, he found a piece of paper nailed to the barn door. YELLOAD, folded once, hammered through with a nail that hadn't been there the night before. No words, just one of the symbols, the eye, drawn in what looked like rust. He burned it. He told himself it was over, but every summer, sometime between dusk and midnight, he swore he could hear tires crunching gravel somewhere behind the barn. And sometimes, just before he falls asleep, he smells that sweet, rotting scent drifting through the cracks in his windows. It was just after midnight when Hank Tolbert spotted the figures standing off the shoulder of Highway 190, not far from the outskirts of Woodville. The rain had just let up after hours of pounding the pavement, leaving the 2-lane road slick and glistening like black ice under his headlights. His 18-wheeler hummed along, tires slicing through shallow puddles, windshield wipers giving that steady rhythm that kept his mind from drifting too far. He wasn't expecting company on that stretch, not at that hour and not in that kind of weather, but there the man was, arm out, thumb raised, soaked to the bone. Hank slowed out of instinct, a half-second decision more reflex than thought. You didn't see many folks hitchhiking anymore, especially out here in East Texas, where the woods press up against the road like they're listening in. Something about the man didn't sit right, though. Maybe it was how still he stood, like he hadn't moved in hours. Maybe it was the long black coat that didn't flap in the wind. Or maybe it was just the look on his face when Hank rolled down the passenger side window. Blank. Not desperate or grateful or scared, just blank. Like a mannequin made flesh. "You headed east?" The man asked, voice calm and low, barely above a whisper. Hank nodded slowly. "Yeah, dropping off a load in Jasper." The man gave the faintest smile, not wide enough to show teeth. "That'll do." He climbed in without waiting for him. Invitation, moved smooth and deliberate, like he wasn't wet at all, like the cold didn't touch him. Hank noticed then, no squish of boots, no trail of water on the step, but by the time the guy settled into the seat, a dark stain had already begun to spread across the upholstery. Wet, cold, soaking into the cushion like the man was dripping from the inside out. Hank tried not to stare, pulled the rig back onto the road, and focused on the lines. The cab was silent except for the engine and the rain still tapping on the roof. The man didn't offer a name, didn't ask questions. Just sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking straight ahead. No smell of mildew, no cough, no sniffle. Just silence. After 10 miles, Hank risked a glance. "Where you headed?" "Doesn't matter," the man replied, then added, "Just needed the ride." A half-mile later, Hank noticed something that knotted his gut. The cab's dome light had flicked on when the man got in, and it stayed on longer than usual, long enough for Hank to see something was off. He checked the passenger side mirror and saw only the faint shadow of his truck trailing in the road. Spray, illuminated by the rear lights. But there was no shadow on the inside of the cab. The guy sitting next to him had no silhouette, no shape cast against the door, no faint reflection in the glass. Just a hole where a presence should have been. Hank's throat tightened. He turned his eyes back to the road. He didn't say a word, didn't ask the obvious. He just drove, heart ticking faster now, hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles paled. Outside, the woods thickened. No street lights out here, just pine trees leaning over the road like they'd whisper secrets if you slowed down. The man shifted in his seat then, head tilting slightly toward Hank, as if he sensed the driver's growing discomfort. "You ever pick up someone you shouldn't have?" he asked, still staring ahead. Hank cleared his throat, forcing his voice steady. "Can't say I have. You just did." Hank didn't respond. He kept his eyes locked on the dashed yellow line, suddenly aware of how far they were from the next town. The road felt longer than usual, stretching endlessly in the dark. The man didn't move, didn't blink, just kept sitting there, calm as could be, his hands never changing position. Hank thought about pulling over, about telling the guy to get out, but something in his gut told him no, that it wouldn't go the way he wanted. So he drove. Another 5 miles, then 10. When the bright lights of a gas station finally flickered into view, Hank let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He pulled into the lot, parking beside one of the pumps, engine still running. The man still hadn't said another word. Hank turned to him, ready to say something, anything, but the seat was empty. No sign of the man. No sound of a door opening. No click, just ... gone. Except the seat was soaked, dark with water, as if the man had melted into it. Not just damp, saturated and cold. So cold the moisture steamed faintly in the cab's warmth. Hank opened his door and stepped down onto the concrete. He looked around, half expecting to see the man walking away into the night, but the lot was empty. The station itself was closed, lights flickering in the windows like a dying heartbeat. He circled the rig. Nothing. No footprints. No drips. No sign anyone had ever been there. When he climbed back into the cab, he reached for a rag to mop up the water. It smeared across the seat like oil, thick and slow, refusing to absorb. The smell hit him then, brackish, like stagnant creek water mixed with something older. Something dead. He gagged and rolled down the window, desperate for air. The radio flared to life without warning. Volume cranked, static screeching into the cab like a scream. Hank slapped it off, his hand trembling. The windshield began to fog from inside, breath clouds forming across the glass even though he wasn't breathing hard enough to cause them. Then, in the condensation on the glass, a word began to form. Not written by a finger, but as if it was rising up from beneath the surface. It said, "Thanks." That was all. Just thanks. Hank left the gas station without fueling up. Drove straight through to Jasper, hands locked at 10 and 2, mouth dry. Eyes scanning every mile for another figure on the roadside. He didn't stop again. Didn't sleep that night. And when he pulled into the depot, he told the guy at the gate that he was done for the week. Maybe for good. 2 weeks later, the dispatcher at the company got a call from some sheriff out in Tyler County. Said a body had washed up in a creek not far from Highway 190. Loaded in gray, no ID, but he'd found something odd, just one thing in the man's waterlogged coat pocket, a slip of paper with Hank's name on it. Nothing else. And even now, years later, when Hank drives past that stretch of road, because sometimes you have to go back, just to make sure the world's still in one piece, he keeps the passenger seat dry and warm, just in case. Because sometimes the road remembers, and sometimes it wants to ride again. The dog had never acted strange before. Tucker was a mutt, part lab, part something wiry and nervous, and he'd always been easygoing. The kind of dog that wagged his tail for strangers, dozed in the sun, and barked only at armadillos rustling through the brush. But the summer they moved to the old house on the edge of Normandy, he changed. It started with growling low, almost like a warning, directed at the back corner of the fence. At first, the family thought it was a possum or maybe a snake in the grass, but nothing was ever there. They checked more than once, even in the daylight, but the corner by the cedar post was always empty. Still, every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the heat began to lift off the earth in lazy, rising waves, Tucker would plant himself 10 feet from that back corner and just watch. Watch and growl. He never crossed that invisible line, not once. Jack, the father, had built the fence himself. It was cedar slats and wire, meant to keep Tucker in and the wild out. The fence ran the length of the yard and ended against a shallow ravine overgrown with brush and wild pear trees. Behind that was nothing but empty pasture and a tree line thick with oaks. Nothing out of the ordinary, but something about that back corner felt off, even to Jack. The cedar there grew twisted, bark peeling in curled strips, and the ground dipped in a way that collected water long after the rain had dried. Still, Jack chalked it up to bad soil and too much shade. It wasn't until the second week of July that they realized it wasn't just Tucker that felt something. Jack's daughter, Ellie, came running inside one night, crying. Said she saw a man standing just beyond the fence, back in the trees. Sighed. He was watching her. Jack grabbed the rifle and a flashlight and stormed out, but there was no one. No broken branches, no footprints, not even a sound. He told her it was probably a shadow, maybe a deer, but Ellie swore up and down the man had no face. Said his head looked like it was covered in burlap or something like it. That night, Tucker didn't stop growling. He didn't bark. Just sat there, body rigid, eyes locked on that corner like something was standing there. Watching back by the third week, strange things started to happen. The porch light would flicker for no reason. One night it shattered outright, showering the deck, with glass just as Jack stepped outside. Ellie said she heard scratching at her window, soft like fingers, not claws. The kitchen radio crackled on in the middle of the night, playing some garbled voice that sounded like it was whispering, not singing. They thought about moving, sure, but it was an old house, old wiring, old everything. And Jack had just sunk everything into the place. It had been his father's home once, back when Normandy was mostly farmland and cattle. He wasn't going to be chased out by shadows and barking, but the night it happened. The night they finally looked over the fence, something changed. It was a Tuesday. The sky was heavy with humidity and the smell of coming rain. The air felt like it was holding its breath. Jack had been watching Tucker more than usual, and that evening the dog refused to eat, refused to come inside, just paced nervously near the back window. Around 10, Tucker started to whine. Not like he wanted something, but like he was in pain. Low, pitiful, almost human. Jack snapped. He grabbed the flashlight, told Ellie and his wife, Maria, to stay inside, and stormed out the back door barefoot. He marched straight across the yard, right toward that corner. The flashlight beam bounced off the trees beyond, catching the glint of spider eyes, leaves, dew, but nothing else. Tucker didn't follow. He just whimpered and backed toward the house. Jack reached the fence. The cedar slats felt damp, and the air smelled sour, like rotting fruit and mildew. He hesitated for a second, then leaned over and shined the beam past the fence line into the underbrush. What he saw shouldn't have been there. There was a man crouched, just beyond the fence, maybe 3 feet away. But not a man, not really. His body was bent wrong. One shoulder raised too high, the head tilted unnaturally sideways, like his neck had been broken long ago and never healed right. His skin looked like wet leather, and where his face should have been, there was something stitched, something tight and patchy like canvas, except it moved with breath. Jack froze. The man was moving his hands slowly in circles on the ground, fingers dragging through the dirt. That same spot where Tucker never crossed. And the man ... thing ... was humming. Not a tune, but something rhythmic, like an old nursery. Rhyme played backward in a broken music box. The flashlight dimmed, and that thing looked up. Even with no visible eyes, Jack felt it. That gaze, it pierced him like ice. He tried to move, but his legs locked. Then the humming stopped, and the figure whispered something Jack couldn't quite catch, a word or maybe a name, and sank into the ground. Not walked away, not crawled. Just slowly melted into the earth as if the soil had opened just for him. Jack stumbled back, heart racing, and slammed the back door shut behind him. Maria screamed when she saw his face, pale, dripping with sweat, hands shaking. Tucker bolted into the laundry room and refused to come out for 2 days. Jack didn't speak the rest of that night. The next morning, the ground by the fence was torn up. Something had dug from the inside out, not in, and there were symbols scratched into the dirt. Old ones that reminded Jack of the strange. Carvings his grandfather had once found beneath the floorboards of the old barn. He remembered something else, too. A story the locals told back when he was a kid. About a drifter who'd come through Normandy in the 1920s asking for work. He was quiet, never took off his gloves, and stayed in the barn behind Jack's grandfather's house. One day he disappeared, but strange things started happening. Animals found gutted, children waking up with scratches on their faces, and a preacher's wife who went mad after seeing a man with no eyes standing in her field. Jack's grandfather buried something behind the barn not long after. A wooden crate wrapped in chains and a burlap sack inside it. Jack thought it was just a tale. Until now, that afternoon, Jack burned the corner of the yard, lit it up with gasoline and a match. The flames cracked and roared, and the air reeked of something worse than fire, something older, like burnt hair and bone. For a moment, he thought he heard screaming, low and distant, like it came from under the soil. But the fire burned cleaned out after that. Tucker started eating again. He still wouldn't go near the fence, but he stopped growling. The lights didn't flicker, the whispers stopped, and the scratching at Ellie's window never came back. But every so often on rainy nights, Jack hears that hum again, faint, like something under the house is remembering, and the dirt in that corner, it never grew grass again. There's a stretch of Farm Road 1488 that runs east out of Magnolia, cutting past subdivisions with names like Timber Ridge and Durango Creek, past quiet horse properties and rows of aging pine. If you drive it at night, especially in the dead heat of July, you might feel like something's off. Not haunted in the old ghost story way. More like the road itself is watching you. Or waiting. That's how it felt to Luke Haywood the night he saw her. It had been a long delivery shift. Luke worked nights for a local flower shop that ran sympathy arrangements to funeral homes and hospital wards. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than his old warehouse job. He'd just dropped off a late order in Conroe and was heading home around 11:30. When he spotted the woman, she stood at the shoulder of the road near a weathered barbed wire fence, right before the bend near the old grain silos, pale as bleached. Driftwood in the high beams. Her dress, white with faint blue flowers, fluttered like tissue in the thick summer air. Luke slowed instinctively, thinking maybe she'd been in a wreck or was lost. She didn't wave, didn't cry for help, just looked straight at him, head tilted like a confused child. He pulled onto the gravel edge and rolled down the window. "Ma'am, you all right?" She didn't answer. Luke reached for his phone to call someone, maybe the sheriff's office. But before he could unlock the screen, she moved. Not walked, moved. One moment she was outside the beam, and the next. She was standing just beside the passenger door. Luke flinched. She didn't look injured. No blood. No dirt. Just ... pristine. Hair curled and pinned back like she'd stepped out of a wedding in the 1950s. Her eyes were wide and glassy, and when she opened her mouth, he expected a scream. A plea. Instead, she said in a voice as flat and cold as the inside of a freezer, "Can I get a ride?" He unlocked the door. He would question that choice for the rest of his life, though he never got a chance to answer the question. Aloud. She slid into the passenger seat, never taking her eyes off the road ahead. Luke swallowed hard, tried to keep his voice steady. "Where you headed?" She didn't respond. He drove, slowly, watching her in his peripheral vision. She didn't move, didn't even blink. Just sat there, hands folded neatly in her lap. The smell in the car changed, not perfume, not sweat, but something sweet and sour, like old flowers that had wilted in their vase. Something faintly acidic. After 5 miles of silence, his phone buzzed in the cup holder. Then again. Then 3 more times. He glanced down. Unknown number. Another buzz. This one said, "Call from Julia." The woman beside him didn't move, but something in her mouth twitched, a muscle that hadn't moved until now. Buzz. Call from Julia. Buzz. Call from Julia. He reached for it, but the screen went black. Then a new notification appeared. 1 missed call from Julia, followed by another, and another, until the screen stacked up 15 missed calls in less than a minute. The name burned into his vision. Julia. He didn't know a Julia. He turned toward the woman again. "Is your name Julia?" She smiled, but not like a person smiles. It stretched. Too wide, too long. Like skin over bone being pulled into a shape it had forgotten. The dashboard lights flickered. He slammed the brakes, tires screaming on the asphalt. But when he turned, she was gone. Passenger seat empty. Door still closed. Luke's hands shook as he yanked the wheel to the side of the road. He fumbled for the dome light. Nothing. Tried the phone again. Dead. The seat was wet. Not soaked, but damp, cold, like someone had been sitting there after a swim. He drove the rest of the way home in silence. Didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every few minutes, his phone buzzed with another call from Julia. When he blocked the number, a new one would take its place. 3 nights later, he drove the same road. He had to know, had to see if it was real. But the road was empty, still and quiet under a full moon. The next morning, he read about a wreck on Farm Road 1488. A sedan veered off the road near the bend by the old silos, burned up with 2 passengers. Inside, sheriff's report said it looked like the driver had swerved for no reason. No animals, no debris. Witnesses claimed to have seen a woman standing on the side of the road earlier that night. Same dress. Same place, they said. Her hair looked perfect. Her skin too white. Luke tried to forget. Deleted the call log. Switched phones. It didn't work. The new phone rang 2 nights later. Unknown caller. Call from Julia. He let it go to voicemail. When he played it back, there was only one sound, breathing. Wet, ragged, close. Then, softly, a voice that wasn't. His said, "This seat's taken." That same week, a tow truck operator vanished after stopping to assist what he thought was a stranded motorist. His cab was found parked and running. Driver's seat soaked. Call log. All recent outgoing calls. 50 in total, to a number saved as Julia. People in Magnolia stopped picking up hitchhikers. Some folks said the woman was a ghost, a spirit in mourning, doomed to wander the backroads waiting for someone to take her home. Others whispered darker things, that she'd never belonged to this world in the first place, that something had come through the trees or the silos or the cracks in the asphalt, and it wore the skin of a woman who'd once died in the summer heat. The flower shop closed down the following spring. Luke was never seen again, but every so often, on humid nights when the crickets fall silent and the pine trees sway without wind, drivers report seeing her again, standing by the shoulder just before the bend. They say if you stop, your phone will call her first. And if you don't, she still find a way in. It was one of those evenings in early August where the sky over West Texas turned the color of old bruise orange, fading to purple, then bleeding into a black so thick it looked like it might drip. Nothing stirred. Not the dry weeds hugging the fence posts, not the vultures that circled during the day. Even the cows in the far pasture had gone silent, pressed close to the mesquite trees like they knew something was coming, something they wanted no part of. Clint Haverly had just finished his third beer, sitting out behind the barn on an old rusted-out lawn chair, the kind that sagged in the middle and pinched your skin if you shifted wrong. He wasn't expecting company. He wasn't expecting anything at all. It was just another night on a quiet patch of land 20 miles outside Sonora, too far for traffic noise, too flat for echoes. Just Clint, the buzz of a dim porch light, and the hum of his own thoughts. Until the light went out. Not flickered. Went out. At first, he didn't move. Thought maybe the breaker tripped or a moth got fried and kicked something loose. But then, he saw it across the open field behind the barn, maybe 50 yards out. A light. Just one. Low to the ground. Moving. It was a lantern, he realized. The kind with the flicker of real fire. It bobbed as it moved, slow and steady, like whoever held it wasn't in any kind of rush. But here's the thing, Clint didn't have neighbors, not close ones. And nobody should have been out there, not on foot, not at night, not unless they wanted to get shot or buried in mesquite roots. He stood. The chair creaked. The light paused. Then it changed direction. Headed straight toward him. Clint didn't run, didn't go inside. That wasn't his way. He reached behind the stack of tires leaning against the barn wall and pulled out the .30-30 he kept for rattlesnakes and coyotes. He racked it, the sound loud in the dead air. The lantern kept moving. Closer now, Clint could see the shape holding. It, a figure. Too tall, too thin. Like a scarecrow someone forgot to stuff right. The firelight cast shadows on the face, or what should have been a face, but all Clint could make out was dark. Wrinkled skin pulled too tight and something missing where the eyes should have been. He raised the rifle. "You're trespassing," he called out, his voice sounding weaker than he meant. "Turn around, now." The figure stopped. The lantern didn't. It floated. No hand, no chain. Just hanging there in the air, fire flickering behind glass that was cracked and blackened from time and smoke. It hovered, turning slowly until it faced Clint directly. Then it went out, gone. Everything went dark again. So dark, Clint couldn't see his own hands. Couldn't even see the barn he was standing next to. Just that thick nothing pressing in all around him. And that's when the voices started. Not one, dozens. Low, whispering. Not in English. Not in any language he knew. They weren't in his ears either. They were in his bones. In the back of his skull. Under his ribs. Chanting, moaning, laughing without breath. He turned and ran. Nearly dropped the rifle. Bolted into the house and slammed the door shut. Chest heaving, sweat cold. And slick on his back. But he wasn't alone. There were wet footprints on the floorboards. Muddy, barefoot. Leading from the back, door to the center of the kitchen where they stopped. He didn't sleep that night or the night after. The next day, he walked the field with his dogs, hoping to find something. A boot print, a lantern, a prankster's joke. But the ground was untouched. No prints, no sign of fire. Nothing but silence. 3 weeks later, at the diner in town, an old man with milky eyes and a cracked voice told Clint something that made his gut clench. "Saw a light on your ridge the other night," the man said, flickering, almost like a soul looking for. Where it died, Clint didn't respond. He just left. That night, he nailed every window shut, covered the mirrors, left the porch light off. But still, around 2 in the morning, from the edge of his property, a single flame flickered to life. And a voice just one spoke from somewhere too close to be safe. It said his name twice, and then ... silence. He doesn't go outside after dark anymore. And the footprints keep getting closer. He said it was just the AC. Said it conked out late in the evening, just as the August heat clung to the air like something wet and sticky. He joked about it, even told folks over at Miller's Grocery that he wanted to sleep like the old-timers. Under the stars, feel the breeze and hear the owls. Fresh air, he'd said, lifting a 6-pack and a bag of jerky. Good for the lungs, better than a damn fan pushing hot air. That was around 7:30, maybe closer to 8. Still light out, sun casting that long orange glow over the dusty edges of Camp Wood, a quiet little town tucked into the southwest pocket of Texas Hill Country, where the deer outnumber people and the night can feel just a bit too wide. His name was Donnie Brewer. Lived in the last house on Cutler Road, single-story ranch-style place with sun-faded siding, a leaning mailbox, and a creaky swing out front that nobody ever used. Worked as a handyman here and there. Not much else to say about Donnie except that he minded his own business, paid in cash, and liked old country on the radio. That night, after picking up his supplies, he parked his folding lawn chair behind the house, just past the dry mesquite line where his patch of mown grass turned to scrubland. He laid out a blanket, propped his cooler beside him, and cracked open a beer. A couple folks said they waved at him from the road. Said he gave a slow nod like he was settling in for something quiet. Normal dot by morning, he was gone. Not just missing from his backyard, but found 5 miles deep in the woods behind the ridge barefoot, shirt ripped open, skin clawed like he'd tried crawling through barbed wire. He wasn't bleeding much, but he was trembling so hard they had to hold his arms just to keep him upright. He didn't say much to the sheriff. Just sat there on the tailgate of the search truck, wrapped in a thermal blanket, whispering the same phrase over and over again like it was a prayer or a warning. They came from the trees. At first, everyone assumed it was dehydration or heat stroke. The man was outside all night, maybe wandered off, got lost, panicked. But that didn't explain how he'd ended up barefoot when neighbors swore they'd seen him in work boots, or how he crossed 5 miles of rough terrain in the pitch dark without a flashlight. And it sure as hell didn't explain what happened to his tent setup, which was still there, untouched, with 2 unopened beers and his boots sitting neatly by the lawn chair. No signs of a struggle. Just a clean, quiet setup like someone had gone out for a smoke and never came back. The real trouble started a couple days later when Donnie stopped speaking altogether. Wouldn't touch food. Wouldn't close his eyes for more than a few seconds before snapping awake, gasping like someone was choking him. The nurse at Uvalde Memorial said he fought off sleep like a man drowning underwater. Said he'd started muttering things in his dreams, low and gravelly things that weren't quite English. They moved him to a psychiatric ward for observation. After that, we stopped hearing much. But stories don't stay quiet long around here. Not in a place like Camp Wood, where the nights stretched too long and folks still put chairs on porches just to listen to the dark. Word spread about what he'd said. About the trees. The phrase lingered like rot. It's not the kind of town that invites change. But after Donnie's breakdown, people started noticing things, little things. Coyotes howling in the wrong direction. Wind chimes clanging when the air was dead still. A couple of old-timers swore the trees along the ridge started growing strange. Not taller, just denser. Thicker than they had any right to be. The kind of brush that chokes out sound and bends light in ways that don't sit right with your eyes. One boy, Eddie Carver, 16, claimed he saw something while camping out there with his cousin. They'd set up a little fire near the edge of the tree line and were just settling in when they heard movement. Slow, deliberate movement. Not like an animal rustling or wind shaking branches. These were steps, 2 at a time, then silence. Then 3 more. Eddie said he turned the flashlight toward it, but the beam bent like it hit fog. Nothing but trees. But then the cousin screamed. Said he saw a face between the branches. Not an animal. A face. Pale, bark-colored, with eyes like knotholes and a mouth that never moved, but somehow still breathed. They ran. Next day they found their campsite ransacked. Not torn apart, not looted, just ... rearranged. Everything flipped upside down. The tent, the chairs, the cooler. Even the fire pit had been neatly filled with dirt. Eddie doesn't talk much anymore. The sheriff won't say it, but folks know he's nervous. Won't let his own boys camp out anymore. And he's started driving the back roads at night with the high beams on and the windows up. He hasn't gone. Near the ridge since. Me, I've lived here my whole life. I know the woods, know how they breathe at night, how they stretch and creak and whisper things if you're real quiet. We used to hunt out past the ridge. Used to fish the creek that cuts down into the ravine behind Donnie's place, but not anymore. Now there's this ... pressure, like the land itself is watching. And the trees, they grow too straight now, too perfect. Lined like sentries with no wind to bend them. And sometimes, just after dusk, you'll hear what sounds like someone knocking softly, rhythmically, deep in the brush. Too far to be a person. Too deliberate to be an animal. A few weeks back, I drove by Donnie's house, empty now. The swing out front finally broke in half, dangling by one rusted chain. But I noticed something strange in the dirt near the back. Fence-bare footprints, small, too small for a grown man. And not just walking away, but circling, like something was waiting. The grass won't grow near them. They came from the trees. That's what he said. And now, some nights when the air gets too still and the moon ducks behind the clouds, I think I hear something breathing out past the ridge. Not loud, not close, just waiting. Stretching deeper into the woods. You can laugh. If you want, say it was the heat. Say it was panic or bad beer or a breakdown. But I've seen those trees, and I know they remember. They said the field had been empty for years. No livestock, no crops, no machinery. Just a square of stubborn Texas grass bordered by rusted fencing and a sagging gate that groaned in the wind. But everyone in Lulling knew to keep their distance. After sundown, kids dared each other to hop the fence and stay for 10 minutes. Most didn't make it past 2. Some didn't talk for a day or 2 afterward. No one really knew what went on out there, only that something was wrong with that land. You could feel it in your teeth if you got too close. A hum, low and pressing, like a warning buried in your bones. My cousin Caleb moved into the old farmhouse next to that field after he got divorced. Said he wanted quiet. Sighed he didn't believe in towny superstitions. It was cheap and isolated and came with 15 acres that hadn't been plowed in decades. Just brush and field and dust. I helped him move in, hauling boxes past. broken porch steps and a screen door that flapped like it had been crying for company too long. He laughed off the rumors. He said people saw what they wanted to see. I didn't argue. I just didn't stay past dark. The first time he mentioned the lights was a week later. We were on the phone, him cracking open a beer, me stuck in traffic near San Marcos. "Hey, you ever seen weird stuff over the field?" he asked. "Like dot lights? Floating ones?" I figured he meant fireflies or maybe some kind of gas flare, but he swore it wasn't that. Said they were big basketball-sized at least and moved in perfect circles. No sound, no flicker. Just pure white light, too steady to be a drone. Or anything man-made. I told him to get it on video. He said he tried. Said the camera wouldn't focus right, and the lights vanished the moment he aimed at them. I brushed it off. Caleb always had a flair for the dramatic. He liked being the center of a story, even if it meant making one up. But he started sounding different after that night. Not just jumpy changed. Quiet. Distracted. I visited again a few days later and found him sitting on the porch, staring at the field like it owed him an explanation. He didn't wave, didn't even look over when I pulled up. Just kept muttering. They were closer last night, closer. I asked if he'd been sleeping. He just laughed short, brittle, and said not really. Said the nights weren't quiet. Anymore, that he could hear knocking sometimes. Not on the door, but the windows. All of them. At once. I didn't want to believe it, but there were smudges on the glass. Greasy half circles and something that looked like dried soil streaked. Under the sills. Too high up for raccoons, too many for birds. I helped him clean them off, and when I asked what he thought was doing it, he just said, "You ever seen something that moved like it was remembering how to be alive?" I didn't sleep well that night. My own place miles away, but I kept. Waking up thinking I heard something tapping. I chalked it up to stress. Caleb called again 3 days later. No small talk this time. Just a whisper. They touched the doorknob. That's when I drove back down. I brought a shotgun and a thermos full of coffee. Said I'd stay the night. He didn't argue. That worried me more than anything. He always used to argue. The house. Felt wrong the second the sun dipped behind the trees. Not just dark too still. Like the walls were holding their breath. I set up in the kitchen, by the back door, with a clear view of the field through the screen. Caleb sat across from me, hands wrapped around a cup he never drank from. We waited. At 11:46 p.m., the lights appeared. Not one or two, but 8 maybe. More floating just above the tall grass in a perfect circle. They didn't sway or flicker, they didn't rise or fall. Just hovered, spinning so slow it almost looked like they weren't moving at all. Caleb grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "That's new," he whispered. "They're lower." At 12:03, they stopped. Then dropped. No sound. No burst of energy. Just gone. Like the ground swallowed them whole. We waited in the silence. Then came the knocking. Not frantic. Not rushed. Just steady, polite, and everywhere. Every window in the house, 9 of them, rattled once. At the same time, we froze. Caleb mouthed, "Don't move." My hand tightened around the shotgun, but some part of me knew it wouldn't matter. The air felt thick. The kind of thick that presses in behind your ears and whispers that something's watching. The knocks came again. This time louder. 1 to 3, like someone keeping rhythm. Then silence. We sat there until morning. Never heard them leave. Never saw the lights again. But when dawn came and I stepped outside, there were prints in the dirt. Not human. Not animal. Long and narrow and deep, like someone had jabbed crutches into the ground and dragged themselves across it. Circles traced into the soil. Perfect ones. As wide as the house itself. Caleb didn't stay after that. He moved in with his sister in Austin. Said the quiet was too loud. Said the knocking had started in the walls too. I drove past the field last month just to see. It looked the same. Overgrown, empty, but someone had nailed boards over every window of the house. Not just one or two, all of them. Even the attic. The boards were cracked, splintered, like something had knocked. Again and again, until the wood started to forget how to hold together. And at the far end of the field, just near the fence, there was a single light floating, not moving, not blinking. Just waiting. It was late June when the Thompsons called me for a last-minute babysitting job out in Lametta. I'd only sat for them once before, sweet baby girl named Emma, still in diapers, and they were always polite, paid well, and left enough snacks to feed an army. Their house sat off a narrow gravel road about 10 minutes outside town, tucked behind a patch of cedar and scrub so thick you couldn't see it from the main road unless you knew exactly where to turn. It was a big old two-story place, creaky in all the right ways, with a front porch that sloped a little and a tin roof that sang when the wind hit it just right. It had character. At least that's what I used to think. That Saturday night, the air was thick with heat and mosquitoes, the kind of oppressive Central Texas evening where everything felt too quiet, like even the frogs and crickets were holding their breath. I remember the sunset bleeding through the trees when I parked in the gravel drive. It stained the horizon this deep, orange-red that looked like fire behind the pines. Mrs. Thompson greeted me at the door, purse over her shoulder. Keys in hand, hair still damp from the shower. "We should be back around midnight," she said, smiling. "Emma's already down. Monitors on in the kitchen. Everything the same?" I asked, stepping in. "Yep. Help yourself to anything. Pantry stocked, fridge too. Just lock up when you're settled." Her husband gave a quick wave from the truck. She paused before leaving. "Don't let the old house spook you," she added. "The wind likes to knock things around." That house always had a certain weight to it, like the air inside held more than just heat. I tried not to notice it the first time I babysat, but that night, once the Thompsons drove off, it felt worse. Denser, heavier, like the house had been holding its breath until they left and now it could exhale. Double-checked all the locks, doors, windows, even the old cellar grate on the side porch that I hadn't noticed last time. Everything shut tight. I set the baby monitor on the coffee table and turned on the living room TV volume low. Nothing too scary, reruns of Friends or something just to keep the place from going. Too quiet, I must have dozed off. I remember my head lolling back, the hum of the box fan, the faint white noise from the monitor. Then the crack came, not a thump, not a creak. A crack, sharp, like wood splitting somewhere in the house. I sat up, heart banging. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. Then, through the static of the baby monitor, a soft thud. Another. Then, movement. I grabbed my phone and stood. The monitor had no video, just audio, and whatever I heard, it wasn't the baby crying. It was shifting. Breathing, maybe. Too heavy for an infant. I took one slow step toward the kitchen where the monitor base sat, and the floor groaned under my feet. That's when the hallway light flicked off. I didn't touch a switch. I froze. The house went dead silent again, except for one thing. The click of the pantry door behind me swinging open just an inch. Just enough for the darkness inside to breathe. I turned and stared at it. The pantry was a deep closet set in the kitchen wall, big enough to stand inside. I had left it closed, I was sure. But now it stood ajar, and the dry rustle of something moving inside drifted out. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Then the monitor flared to life. A burst of static. Then clear as a bell, a small voice, Emma's, crying. Not normal crying. Not a baby wail, This was sharp, gasping, panicked. Then the line went dead. I don't know what made me run. I didn't think. I just bolted toward the stairs to get to her room, but I only made it 3 steps before I heard a voice, not hers, down low, croaking from the pantry. Don't. It stopped me cold. Don't go up there. I backed up, slowly, 1 footstep at a time, the way you move when a stray dog's watching you too closely. The pantry door creaked another inch open. The light in the hallway buzzed and flickered. Emma? I called out silence that I didn't go upstairs, that I didn't check the nursery. Turned and ran into the pantry and slammed the door shut behind me. Don't ask me why. Maybe instinct. Maybe terror. Maybe something about that voice. But I locked myself in there like it was the last safe place on earth. I still had my phone. I turned on the flashlight and backed as far as I could into the shelves of cereal and canned beans, breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. The light bulb in the pantry flickered once, then went out. I was left with only the narrow cone. From my phone, and I swear to God, I wasn't alone. There was something outside the door, not walking, crawling. I could hear it, something dragging, scraping softly over wood. A long pause. Then the faintest sound of breath on the other side of the door, like someone sniffing the crack where the wood met the frame. I texted Mrs. Thompson in full panic. Someone's in the house. I locked myself in the pantry. Call police. No reply. Dragging sound circled the pantry. I heard the edge of something scrape slow across the floor, back and forth. And then silence. Then came the clawing, not scratching, not knocking. Clawing, deep, ragged, splintering swipes that raked the wood like someone trying to dig through it with fingernails. I backed up into the shelving hard enough to knock over a bag of sugar. It hit the floor, split open, and the white powder spilled like sand around my feet, and still the clawing came. Slow, steady, angry. I held my breath. Tried not to cry. Called 911. They picked up. I whispered everything. Where I was. What I heard. The dispatcher told me to stay put, that units were en route. I stayed on the line, but the scratching stopped. And then, the door creaked inward just half an inch. I had locked it. I knew I had. I held the door closed with both hands, trembling, whispering for help into the phone. Then came the whisper again, from behind me this time. Inside the pantry. You shouldn't have come here. I screamed out. By the time the police arrived, I was gone. That's what the official report says. Mrs. Thompson showed them the texts. The baby was still asleep upstairs, untouched. The monitor was off. No signs of forced entry. Every door still locked from the inside. Pantry door still latched, except there were claw marks. Deep ones, carved down the inside of the door in long, furious strokes. They found my phone there too. Screen cracked. Sugar still covering the floor. They searched the house, attic to crawl space. Nothing. No trace of me. The Thompsons moved out within a week. People around Lametta say the house still sits empty now, just off that gravel road behind the trees. Some claim you can see a faint light under the pantry door if you drive by real. Slow after midnight. They say if you stop, roll down your window, and listen real close, you might still hear the scratching. He'd meant to drive straight through Matagorda and sleep in his truck near the coast, like he always did on these lonely fishing runs, but the storm rolled in faster than the radio said it would. Rain like bullets. Wind like someone screaming. Against the windshield. The wipers couldn't keep up, and after nearly sliding into a ditch past an old bait shack, he pulled off at the first neon he saw, a flickering red sign over a cracked stucco building that read Coastal Pines Motel. The front office was empty, no bell, no attendant, just a handwritten note. Take any key. $1.40 under door. So he slid 2 20s in the slot and took the key to room 3. The room smelled like mildew and linoleum wax, with floral curtains that didn't quite shut all the way and a wall AC that rattled like it was chewing gravel. But it was dry. The sheets were clean enough, and he was too tired to care much. He set his tackle box by the bed, kicked off his boots, and went to the bathroom to wash up. The mirror was wide, taking up most of the wall, cracked in one corner, and foggy around the edges like it hadn't been wiped in years. He brushed his teeth, watching his reflection the whole time, which struck him as odd later that he felt the need to look himself in the eye like that. Like part of him already didn't trust the room. He spat, rinsed, clicked off the bathroom light, and was halfway back to the bed when he heard it. Soft, breathy, a whisper behind him, low and slow and unmistakable. His name. He froze. It hadn't come from outside, not from the hallway. It came from the mirror, from the dark square of the bathroom behind him. He turned, heart thudding so hard it shook the air in his ears. The bathroom light was off, but he could still make out the faint gleam of the mirror in the window glow. He crept toward it. Nothing moved. He flipped on the light. The bathroom looked exactly as it had, except now there was a handprint in the steam on the lower left corner of the glass. A handprint, small like a child's, but he hadn't taken a shower, hadn't created any steam. He stood staring at it for what felt like minutes, the way you stare at a shadow in the woods too long, and start to wonder if it's looking back. Eventually he wiped the print away with a towel and left the light on when he returned to bed. But sleep didn't come easy. The wind kept rattling something, maybe a vent outside, maybe a loose pipe under the floor, and every few minutes he'd think he heard something like the soft scrape of movement just beyond the wall. Once, he thought he saw motion in the bathroom mirror from where he lay. Not a reflection. Something on the surface. A ripple. Like someone had pressed their face against the glass and it hadn't quite settled back. At 2:17 a.m. He sat bolt upright, not because of a sound, not because of a dream, but because he knew, with that deep, cold certainty that has nothing to do with logic, that someone was watching him. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. And then it came again. This time louder. His name whispered from the bathroom. No other words, just his name, drawn out like someone tasting it. He got up slowly, took the flashlight from his tackle box. Not because the power was out, but because he didn't trust the overhead light not to betray him somehow. He stood at the bathroom door, flashlight off, just breathing. The whisper didn't come again, but the mirror was fogged. This time, the handprint was joined by a smudge. A streak, like a nose, like a face pressed hard against the inside of the mirror trying to look out. And in the reflection of the light from the bedroom, he thought, he swore, he saw 2 eyes, open, white as shell. He backed away, shut the door, turned on every light in the room, paced until morning. At sunrise, he threw his things into the truck and peeled out of the lot, heart still hammering, mouth dry. He didn't look back, didn't stop for coffee, just drove. That should have been the end of it. But 3 days later, back in Galveston, he caught himself talking to his reflection. Not in a joking way, in full sentences, like he expected it to reply. And sometimes late at night, it did. It started small. His name whispered behind him while shaving. A laugh, not his, after turning off the light. Then the mirror started showing things that weren't in the room. A table that didn't exist. A window that wasn't there. Someone standing behind him when no one was home. He tried taking the mirror down, replaced it, broke it. But each time, the new one fogged just the same, and eventually, the face returned. Always at night. Always just as he was about to sleep. One night, he covered all. The mirrors in the house with blankets and duct tape. Every single one. Even the microwave and the rearview mirror in the truck. It didn't help. He woke up with condensation on the inside of his windshield and the words, "Come back to room 3" scrawled in the fog. He smashed the glass with his fists, screaming. Blood. On his knuckles. Still, the words remained. He tried staying with a friend, checked into a hotel, slept in a park once. But no matter where he went, every mirror knew him. Every reflection smiled before he did. Every whisper still carried his name, sometimes from the sink, sometimes from the TV screen. Once, even from a puddle on the street after a storm. He didn't go back to room 3, not at first, but you can only live so long without looking into your own eyes. So eventually, he drove back to Matagorda. He parked in front of the Coastal Pines Motel, which looked somehow more rundown than before. The sign was half dark. Weeds grew through cracks in the lot. No cars. No footprints. The office door swung open when he touched it. No one was inside, but on the desk, in the same slanted handwriting as before, was a new note. Room 3 is waiting. He didn't need a key. The door was already open. The room smelled the same. The sheets were turned down like someone expected him. The bathroom mirror was spotless. He stepped in front of it, and for the first time in months, his reflection didn't blink, didn't move, didn't even breathe. And when he turned to leave, just to test it, just to see, the man in the mirror stayed. He's still in there, that man, waiting to be let out. They say you can hear it even if you're just passing through. The screams that rise up from that old concrete silo 3 miles west of Yoakum, just off County Road 412. You'd have to know what to look for, though, because there's no sign, no marker, not even a clear path anymore. The brush has grown thick around it, swallowing the trail the farmhands once used when this part of Lavaca County was more alive. But if you stop your truck, kill the engine, and wait, especially on a still summer night, the sound will find you. The voice. The begging. Always the same words, locals say. Always the same damn plea. It was just folklore until June of 1996. That's when my cousin Jeremy moved back home after college. He'd been away at Texas Tech, got a degree in agricultural science or something like that, and figured he'd come back to help on the family ranch outside Yoakum. He was practical, rational to the bone, and didn't give a damn for small-town ghost stories. I remember him laughing when I told him about the screams from the silo. We were drinking beers in the bed of his pickup, watching the stars blur together over the cornfields. He grinned and said, probably just a bobcat or some busted wind valve. Maybe even teenagers pulling a prank. But 3 nights later, he called me just after 2 a.m., said he heard it. Said he drove out there alone. He was shaking when I arrived at his house. Pale, sweat-drenched, like he'd run a marathon through hell. Wouldn't go back outside. Wouldn't let me turn off the lights. Kept saying it wasn't the sound, it was how I knew the voice. When I asked him what he meant, he said the screaming had his mother's voice. His mother, who died in 1989. That's when I started digging. The silo was built in the 1950s, part of an old grain storage facility that shut down after a string of accidents, or at least that's the official version. But if you talk to the old-timers, the ones who still sit out front of Lester's Hardware every morning sipping black coffee from foam cups, you get another story. They say something bad was buried beneath that concrete long before the silo went up. A family that disappeared in the early 1900s. A little church that caught fire one Halloween night. Rumors of a traveling preacher who came to town and vanished. Along with 3 children. No one ever proved anything. But the silo was built directly over the ruins of that church, and folks who worked there, before it shut down for good, talked About things going missing, equipment, grain, animals. People. My uncle knew one of the last workers, an older man named Marvin Cates. Marvin lived in a trailer on the edge of town, drunk most of the time until he disappeared in '82. Before he went, he told my uncle that the silo ate voices. That's how he put it. Said it echoed back things you didn't say out loud, things you heard in dreams. Marvin claimed that one night he locked up the place and started walking to his truck when he heard his baby sister crying inside the silo. The same sister who'd drowned in the Guadalupe when they were kids. Jeremy didn't believe any of this, not at first. But something changed after that night. He stopped sleeping. He'd wake up screaming. He started seeing things out in the fields. Said he'd find boot prints circling the house in the morning, deep and wide like someone pacing in the dark all night. Then he started drawing. I still have one of the sketches. It's folded and brittle now, edges curled like old leaves. It shows the silo, but it's different. Taller, warped, with narrow black slits running up the sides like stitched wounds. And something is peeking out of the top, just barely. Something with hands too long for its body and a face that looks like it's mid-scream, stretched open in a way no human mouth should be. By July, Jeremy was a shell. He wouldn't go near the fields. He stopped returning calls. Wouldn't let anyone visit. Then, one night, he vanished. His truck was found parked a few hundred feet from the silo. Door open. Engine still warm. The driver's seat soaked. Not with rain, but something that smelled metallic and bitter. No sign of him. Just a set of footprints leading to the silo door. None coming out. That was nearly 30 years ago. But the screams still come. I went back recently. I don't know why. Maybe to find something he left behind. Maybe to prove to myself that it was all in our heads. I brought a recorder. Left it running overnight in my truck while I camped a few yards away. I've only listened to the recording once. There's wind at first, crickets, normal sounds of a Texas summer night. Then around 2:17 a.m., it starts. A woman's voice, broken, panicked, distant. Please, not again. Please don't make me go back inside. Please. Then silence. Then my own voice, but I swear to God I never said it. Open the door. The next morning, I found the recorder cracked in half. No animals nearby. No people. Just that old concrete silo rising like a tombstone against the pale orange dawn, as quiet as a corpse. The screams? They'll start again tonight. They always do. Same time. Same voice, same words, and God help whoever listens long enough to answer. They said it was just hide and seek, a few kids playing in the cornfield out behind the Blakely farm, east of Gauze. August sun had just dipped past the tree line, the sky turning that thick copper red you only get in Texas summer. You could still hear cicadas droning like broken wiring. The stalks stood too tall for a 7-year-old. But that's where they always played. Safe, familiar. Or so they thought. Tyson was the youngest, the smallest, and the one always trying too. Hard to keep up. The other kids, his cousins and 2 neighbors, teased him sometimes, called him a baby when he asked to go back to the house early. But that evening, he seemed different, restless, giddy, even. His mom said he kept looking out the kitchen window. During dinner, eyes fixed on the field like it was calling him. She figured it was just excitement. Kids get wired when the sun sets and the air finally cools. They played the usual game. One seeker, the rest scattered. Tyson darted into the corn without hesitation, grinning, legs pumping like a rabbit. It should have been 5, maybe 10 minutes. Before they found everyone. But by the time the older boy shouted, "All right, y'all can come out," nobody had seen Tyson. They called and laughed, assuming he was crouched somewhere clever, waiting to win. They didn't laugh long. The sun was down and flashlights were out. Parents came out onto the porch. First calls were casual, then anxious, then louder. They fanned out through the rows. It's easy to get turned around in a cornfield at dusk. The rows all look the same and sound doesn't carry right. You'd swear someone's just to your left, but it's echo. Or worse, nothing at all. It was Tyson's mother who found him. Almost an hour later, he was standing in the middle of a narrow clearing no one remembered being there before. Not a clearing, really, more like the stalks had folded back in a near-perfect oval 10 feet across. He stood dead center, hands limp at his sides, head tilted slightly, staring at nothing. Smiling. Not wide, not goofy, just a gentle, unnatural curl of the lips that looked pasted on. And he didn't blink when she rushed. Didn't flinch when she sobbed and hugged him. Just kept smiling, and he wouldn't speak. Not a word. They thought maybe he was in shock, so the doctors checked him. No injuries, no dehydration, no signs of trauma. But he still wouldn't talk. At first, he responded to his name, looked when someone said it, nodded occasionally. But by the third day, even that stopped. He just stared, always with that faint smile, like he was listening to something far away. They kept him home, hoping time would fix it. But his behavior got stranger. At night, he'd wander the house barefoot, never making noise. His mom would wake to find him standing at the foot of her bed, staring, smiling. He wouldn't react if you spoke, just turn and walk back to his room, closing the door without a sound. They tried locking his door. It never worked. Somehow, every night around 3:13 a.m., he'd be standing in a different hallway or staring out the living room window at the corn. He refused food unless it was corn. Cornbread? Corn on the cob. Creamed corn. It was all he'd touch. And he ate it strangely slow, deliberate bites, chewing like he was savoring every kernel, every grain. His father swore he heard him whisper something once as he ate, a name or maybe a prayer. But when he leaned closer, the whispering stopped. Then came the drawings. One morning, they found dozens of them, crude crayon sketches on torn notebook paper, stacked neatly in the middle of the living room floor. Each one showed a child standing in a circle of corn, arms down, eyes black, mouth curled into that same thin smile. Behind each child, deep in the rows, was something else. A figure, always drawn faintly, tall, pale, watching. They burned the drawings. Tyson didn't react, but that night he didn't sleep. They heard him pacing for hours. On the 7th day, the dog disappeared. Old Jasper, half blind, barely walked, had been lying in the sun by the porch. Midday, no signs of struggle. No barking. Just gone. Later that afternoon, they found muddy paw prints leading from the porch into the cornfield. Then nothing. That night, Tyson spoke. His mother was awake in bed, praying quietly, when she heard him behind her. "They want more," he said, voice thin and wrong, like it was coming through a radio tune just slightly off. She turned slowly. He stood at the doorway, in the dark, head tilted. Still smiling. "They're hungry again," she screamed. Her husband rushed in, but Tyson was gone. Just gone. They searched the house, then the field. Hours passed. They found him at dawn, standing in that same clearing. This time, there were footprints. Multiple sets. Bare feet. Small. Like children. Dozens of them. Leading in circles around the clearing, some overlapping, some fresh. But none let out. He didn't speak again. They took him to stay with relatives in Temple, away from the field. He grew silent, even colder. Never laughed, never cried. He just sat. And every night, He scratched something into the wall beside his bed with his fingernail dot by the end of the month. The wall was covered in the same word over and over. Yield. Nobody knew what it meant. But the corn and gauze? It grew strange. That year, taller than ever, thick, heavy, a dull green color that made the sky look sick above it. The Blakeleys tried harvesting early. Their combine broke down 3 times. And when they finally got through it, they found patches where the stalks weren't plants at all, just hollow husks. Like something had grown there, then moved on. They sold the land a few months later. Nobody wanted it, not really. But some out-of-state company took a cheap dot as for Tyson. He disappeared 2 years later during a camping trip near Waco, walked into the woods while the others slept, and never came back. No footprints, no scent, no struggle. But when the ranger asked the kids if anything strange had happened that night, one of them said yes. He'd heard whispering coming from the trees, and Tyson had been smiling. Just before he vanished, he looked up at the stars and whispered something. Time to go back. He told them he just needed a minute, that the air inside the camper was too stuffy, and the beers had made his head feel like it was stuffed with cotton. No one argued. They were half drunk and sunburned, and halfway through a card game, parked. Just 100 feet off Possum Kingdom Lake, where the gravel cracked underfoot and the moon left pale streaks on the water like smeared chalk. That was around midnight. He took his keys, out of habit more than necessity, and stepped out barefoot, still laughing at something someone had said about the ranger's mustache. The screen door slapped shut behind him. And that was the last time they saw him, it? Wasn't until morning that they noticed he was gone. Nobody panicked right away. There were 5 of them in total, 3 guys, 2 girls, and it wasn't unusual for one of them to crash outside or wander down to the water for a piss or to stare at the stars or have a smoke. But by the time the sun was high and the cicadas had begun their electric scream in the trees, unease had crept in like mildew. His phone was still on the camper table, next to a bag of Doritos and an unopened beer. The truck was locked. His fishing pole was in its spot, leaning against the picnic table. But when one of them walked over to the fire pit, still ringed with charred rocks and a few half-burned logs, they found his boots, laid side by side, and the cold gray ash dot not just tossed there, neatly arranged as if someone had placed them carefully, toe to toe, like a pair of shoes by a bedside. Between them, partially buried in the white soot, were his keys. The plastic fob had melted a little from the heat, but the metal glinted. The strange thing was the fire had already burned down when they all went to bed. Someone, or something, had relit it during the night. The soot was still warm. They called his name. Checked the bathrooms. Walked the trail that looped back. Toward the cliffs. Nothing. No tracks in the dirt, no rustle in the brush, no splash from the lake. He was just gone. The rangers came, slow-moving and skeptical. They asked if he'd been depressed, if he had a record, if he maybe got high, and wandered off. They asked what they'd been drinking, if they'd done mushrooms or anything recreational. They brought out a dog that sniffed the boots and whined, then paced in circles, confused. It wouldn't cross the fire pit. Wouldn't even go near a dot by evening. They'd brought in boats. Divers. They searched the shoreline for signs of a fall, a torn shirt, blood on a rock, something. But there wasn't even a ripple. Possum Kingdom wasn't that big. If he had drowned, his body should have surfaced eventually. They never found it. The group was questioned again and again. They told the same story. No arguments, no weird behavior, no drugs. Just a guy stepping outside for air who never came back. And a pair of boots sitting in the ashes, undisturbed by the wind or animals or time. After 3 days, the search was called off. His parents came to collect his things. His mother broke down when she saw the fire pit. His father just stood there, staring at the boots like they might answer if he looked hard enough. They packed up the camper. The group left early, didn't even finish their last night. Nobody wanted to stay anymore. The lake, once serene and golden and full of childhood memories, now seemed wrong. Too still, too silent. A place where someone could vanish and leave behind nothing but shoes in the ashes. The weirdest part came later. About 6 months after the disappearance, one of the girls from the trip, Mandy, started having dreams. Always the same. She's standing at the edge of the fire pit, looking down into it, and the ashes are glowing red like they've just been stirred. Then she hears his voice, faint, like wind through dry grass, calling her name from somewhere underneath. Not from the woods, not from the lake, from beneath the fire, she told the others. They laughed it off at first, called it survivors. Guilt. But then one of the guys, Luis, admitted he'd had something similar. Except in his dream, it wasn't just a voice, it was hands. Thin, sooty hands reaching up from the ash, trying to grab his ankles. He said he could feel the heat on his skin even after he woke up. Like sunburn, but deeper. More dreams came. Each more vivid. Each with the same central horror, the fire pit, the ashes, and something trying to come out. Mandy went back once, alone. She said she needed closure. Drove out there on a gray Sunday with clouds hanging low like wet laundry. It was winter by then, and the campground was empty. She found the same spot, same fire pit. The rocks were still there, scorched black. A few pieces of charred wood remained, half buried in frostbitten grass. She stood there for a while. Sighed. She whispered his name, even though she didn't mean to. Said the moment she did, the air shifted, got heavier. Then she noticed something poking up from the ash, just beneath the surface. It was a toe bone. Just one. Clean, white, like it had been cooked. They tested it later. Human, male, size. Matched. No one could explain how it got there, why it hadn't been found before. Rangers reopened the case for about a week. Dug up the fire pit, tested the soil, even looked for signs of tampering. They found nothing else. Nothing but a single bone and a report marked inconclusive. After that, the dreams got worse. Mandy moved away. Luis stopped answering calls. The rest drifted apart. But they all shared one secret: none of them would ever camp again. Not just at Possum Kingdom Lake. Anywhere. The story made local news, then vanished. Too strange to hold attention. No arrests, no body, just a name carved into a bench near the trailhead. A reminder. They say sometimes if you walk past that fire pit just after dark, you can hear footsteps circling you. Barefoot, careful, and if you look down, really look into the ashes, you might see the shape of something curled beneath them, watching, waiting for someone else to need some air. It started with the sound of gravel crunching outside around 2:40 a.m., that thin, specific sound, like something heavy rolling just slow enough not to be a car, just fast enough to not be wind. Mark had been awake, lying on his old recliner with the TV on mute and a fan blowing directly in his face when it passed in front of the house, whatever it was. A shape, maybe, moving just beyond the reach of the porch light's amber glow. He thought it was a cow at first. Wouldn't be the first time something from the neighbor's ranch wandered past, especially this far out in Valverde County, where most of the fences were more for show than function. But cows don't roll, and cows sure as hell don't bolt. Mailboxes into the ground before sunrise. By the time Mark stepped out that morning, coffee in hand and the faint ache of sleep still in his neck, the mailbox was there. Just there. Standing maybe 20 feet from the end of his dusty driveway. On the opposite side of the Kalish Road, right in the dead grass where nobody had laid foot in years. No postmark, no address numbers, no paint. Just matte black steel. The old-fashioned kind, with the curved top and the squeaky door that snapped shut with a spring. New, clean, out of place. He squinted at it for a while, wondering if it was a prank. Maybe those punks from the high school had hauled it up there after a late-night beer run. But he didn't see any tire marks, no beer cans, nothing except one set of footprints, small, barefoot, leading to the mailbox and then disappearing into the brush behind it. No return prints, no scuffs, just that path. Like someone walked up out of nothing, planted it, and vanished again. He stood across from it for a few long minutes, sipping his coffee and feeling an odd pressure in the back of his head, like a low-grade tension headache that tightened just behind his ears. It came on only when he looked at the thing, but he couldn't stop looking. Not until he finally stepped across the road and opened the mailbox. Inside was a single envelope, cream-colored, no stamp, no name, sealed with what looked like melted wax pressed into a circle. A symbol was carved into the seal, not a cross, not a letter. A circle with a single line running through it, like a zero with a scar. He didn't open it there. He took it inside, set it on the kitchen table, stared at it while his second pot of coffee brewed. And maybe it was the unease still squirming in his gut, or maybe it was the sound the mailbox had made when he shut it, not the metallic thunk of spring and steel, but something more like a breath being held. But by the time he opened the envelope, he half expected something worse than what he found. The paper inside was bone white, thick like parchment, and the message was short. You saw too much. That was it. No signature. No threat, just a fact. Or a warning. Or both. Mark lived alone, had for 8 years since his wife passed, and most days he preferred it. But the silence in that house after he read the letter wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence you only find in hospitals before a monitor. Flat lines. His heart thudded just a little too hard. His breathing felt shallow. He crumpled the note, tossed it in the trash, and told himself it was someone's idea of a sick joke. Maybe because he'd called the sheriff last week about lights he'd seen in the back pasture, a string of them, glowing white, no sound, hovering just above the dry ground. They'd blinked out when he shined his mag light on them, and when he checked the spot the next day, the grass had been singed in perfect circles. Sheriff Porter told him it was probably teenagers with drones and heat lamps. Mark hadn't pushed it. He knew what he saw. That day went slowly. The mailbox stayed. A few drivers passed on the road, but none of them stopped. A FedEx truck barreled through just after lunch and didn't even slow down, despite it being the only mailbox for 10 miles. Mark checked it again mid-afternoon. Empty. Still no address. Still bolted so deep into the soil that it didn't wiggle an inch when he kicked it out by nightfall. He started to feel watched. The blind stayed shut. The back porch light flickered once around 8:30 and then died entirely, leaving that half of the property in darkness. He tried not to look at the mailbox through the front window, but it drew his eyes every time he passed. Like it had gravity. Just after midnight, he heard scratching. Not at the door. Not on the walls. From inside the mailbox. He didn't move at first, just sat in the dark of his living room, every light off, not even the fan on. His ears strained. The sound came in little waves. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch. Then something tapped the inside, like knuckles on metal, soft, measured, waiting. He didn't go out. By morning. He found the front door ajar, though he was sure he'd locked it. His boots were soaked with dew when he stepped outside, the grass cold underfoot. He approached the mailbox again. No scratching now, no movement. But inside was another envelope. This one read, "You kept watching." His stomach clenched. This one he didn't crumple. He left it open on the table, eyes darting to it every few minutes. He didn't call anyone. Didn't know who to call. The sheriff wouldn't come out for a mailbox. He barely came out for theft, let alone threats with no fingerprints, no tire marks, no suspects. He stayed awake all that night, shotgun across his lap, the blinds cracked just enough to see the road. Nothing came. Nothing moved, but at 3:17 a.m., a figure stood beside the mailbox. No headlights, no footsteps. Just their tall, thin, hunched forward, skin pale and reflective like glass left out in moonlight. No face that he could see, just shadow where a head should be. Its arm was too long, reaching past its knees, and it slowly, delicately opened the mailbox. It slid in another envelope, then stood still for nearly a full minute, head tilted toward the house like it could see through the window. Then it vanished, not walked away, just gone. Mark didn't move. Not until dawn painted the mesquites gold. He didn't want to open the third letter. He burned it in the sink without reading it. But he checked the mailbox anyway that night. And the next each morning, another letter appeared. Even when he didn't look, even when he stayed inside. Sometimes he burned them, sometimes he buried them. But he never read past the fourth. The fourth said, "We warned you." He stopped sleeping. Something in the air around his property felt wrong now. Thick, heavy, charged like static before a storm. Animals avoided the road completely. Birds no longer sang in the trees. And at night, he could hear humming beneath the floorboards, soft and constant, as though something deep underground had woken up and was waiting for him to notice. 3. Days after the first letter, he drove into town, not to the sheriff this time, but to Pastor Ellis, a man he hadn't spoken to since the funeral. He tried to explain. Didn't mention creatures or disappearances. Just said something strange had started on his land. Something he couldn't explain. Ellis said a prayer over him, gave him a small wooden cross, and told him to bury it near the mailbox. Mark did. That night, the mailbox was gone. Not moved. Not knocked over. Gone, post and all. The cross he'd buried lay on top of the grass, snapped in half, and in its place, carved into the dirt where the mailbox had stood, was a single line of text. Burned into the earth. You never should have looked. Mark moved a week later. Left everything. Truck, tools, even his boots. The house stood empty. Curtains drawn, power disconnected. Locals say someone else moved in 6 months after, but they didn't stay long. Same reason folks say lights in the pasture, scratching in the dark, things showing up that don't belong. And every now and then, when someone drives past that empty lot on a moonless night, they say you can still see a mailbox standing. Alone in the tall grass, no address, no markings, and just enough light to see a pale hand slipping something inside. It started as one of those quiet, muggy evenings where the stillness feels unnatural, like the air itself is holding its breath. Summer in the hill country hits different when you're that far off the beaten path. Melissa and Troy had pulled off the main road just past Blanco, where the gravel twisted into a forgotten slice of the old settlers' trail and emptied into a dead-end clearing surrounded by dense cedar and mesquite. They weren't planning to camp overnight. It was supposed to be a quick hike and maybe a view of the stars before heading back to Austin. Melissa brought a blanket, Troy had his little speaker, and they split a warm beer before deciding to follow. A deer path through the trees just as the sky turned navy, and the first stars blinked awake. They hadn't gone far when they saw the light. It looked like a flashlight, beam about 40 yards off to their right, bobbing slightly the way you'd expect a handheld one to move. A clean circle of white light sweeping side to side, pausing now and then like someone was searching for something. Melissa was the first to whisper that it was probably a ranger. Maybe they were on protected land. Maybe there were fines for being back there. They crouched low behind some brush, debating whether to call out or double back. But then the light did. Something strange. It didn't turn. It pivoted without the sway or lag of human hands. A sharp, mechanical motion like it knew exactly where it wanted to go next. Melissa muttered, "Did you see that?" And Troy nodded, standing just enough to peek. The light paused again, then moved toward them. They ducked. No footsteps, no voices. Just the low insect hum of Texas night and the sound of that beam skimming through the undergrowth. And it wasn't white anymore. It had shifted, just slightly, to something colder. Bluer, like the glow of an old CRT screen. Then another beam appeared, not 20 feet from the first, sweeping just as deliberately, almost mimicking the original. Troy grabbed Melissa's wrist and started pulling her back the way they came. But the ground wasn't familiar anymore. The path behind them had vanished, or more accurately, it was there, but it didn't look like what they'd walked through. No boot marks, no broken twigs. And the trees looked wrong. Taller, too close together. Like they'd somehow wandered deeper in without realizing it. Then 2 more lights blinked on, forming a wide circle around them. Melissa let out a short gasp and dropped the speaker she'd been carrying in her hoodie pocket. It hit the ground and started playing, softly, a song they hadn't cued. Just static at first. Then a low voice under it, barely audible. "Don't run, don't move, don't speak." Troy stomped it off with his heel. The lights began to move, not just sweeping, but sliding across the forest floor like they were skating above the brush. Fast, too fast. They circled wide and then closed in tighter, and for a moment, it felt like they were caught in some kind of hunting pattern. That's when Melissa broke. She bolted to the left, deeper into the trees, dodging branches and shouting for Troy to follow. He hesitated, then ran after her. Behind them, the beam split again, now 6, now 8, forming almost perfect concentric rings that pulsed out and reeled back in like sonar. The lights didn't rise or fall with terrain. They simply glided, quiet, precise, unnatural. Melissa stumbled into a dry creek bed and twisted her ankle hard. Troy caught up and helped her limp under a fallen log. They crouched there, panting, while the beams passed just above their heads, sweeping like radar. And then they stopped. All at once. Every beam froze. Hanging in the air, no buzzing, no breeze. The night had gone still, not calm but hollow, like the forest had gone indoors. Even the bugs had gone quiet. And then the beams snapped off. Total darkness. They stayed under that log for what felt like an hour. They whispered, cried a little, argued in hushed tones about what to do. Troy finally peeked out and saw only moonlight and shadows. No lights, no movement. But then they heard something new. Boots, crunching gravel, heavy, measured, like someone walking in a straight line toward them. Melissa clamped her hand over her mouth. Troy froze. The steps reached the edge of the creek bed and stopped. They never saw who or what it was. But something exhaled, not like a man. Something deeper, hollow, as if lungs were remembering how to breathe. Then came the scrape, slow, sharp metal dragging across rock, and then retreat. The boots moved away. No light followed. When they climbed out and tried to find the trail, everything had changed again. The forest didn't just feel different. It was different, taller, denser. The trees grew in geometric rows now, evenly spaced, no underbrush, no wildlife. Like someone had planted them with a ruler. And there were no stars anymore. The moon was still there, but dimmer somehow. Pale, like someone had drained the color out of it. They walked for hours in a straight line and never hit a road. just more trees. Then they started seeing the lights again, not beams this time, but distant orbs hovering in pairs. Always in pairs, like eyes. Never blinking. At one point, they came across a single metal pole in the middle of a clearing. Welded into it was an old floodlight, one you'd see in a parking lot, but it had no wiring, no base, no power source. It clicked on as they passed, humming with energy. It wasn't pointed at the ground. It was pointed straight up. Melissa tried her phone again. Still no signal. No GPS. The battery drained as she watched. They found an old trailhead sign eventually, rotted wood, no writing. Just 4 deep claw marks across its face. Below it, barely visible in the dirt, was something like a footprint, but too long. Toes arched like talons. No heel. Just those. They spent the night in that spot, huddled back to back, trying not to sleep. The lights came again. More of them. Dozens, circling at a distance now, watching. Every time they blinked, the lights seemed closer. Every time they turned their backs, the lights moved. Melissa started muttering to herself, repeating their address in Austin like it was a prayer. Troy stared at the lights with glassy eyes, like he was starting to understand something he couldn't explain. By morning, the lights were gone. So was the trailhead sign. So were their footprints. They wandered until they reached a barbed wire fence and followed it for what felt like miles. Eventually, it led to a dirt road, then a gate, then a ranch house. They were let in by a couple who looked shocked to see them. "You two from the search party?" the man asked. Melissa shook her head. "No, we got lost in the woods." The man looked at his wife, confused. "There haven't been woods back there in over 30 years. That was yesterday. Melissa hasn't said much since. Troy won't turn off the porch light. They won't talk about the woods. But every night around the same time, Troy walks to the edge of their backyard and stares out into the dark, watching for something. Last night he said he saw a light, just one, but it was moving. He was eating watermelon, laughing. The porch creaked under the weight of his little feet as he rocked in that old cedar chair. The sun had just started dipping below the scrubby mesquite line out in the back pasture, casting everything in that amber light that made even the dry dirt of Katerina look gentle for once. His mother had just stepped inside to fetch more paper towels, not because he was messy, though he was, but because she was the kind of woman who wiped down everything twice. Even Wood, her boy, was about to drip juice on and then he was gone. 1 second. 6-year-old Caleb Vasquez was leaning forward to scoop another triangle of watermelon from the white bowl with the faded red flowers, the kind every abuela had at some point, and the next, the chair tipped. It didn't crash, it didn't thud, it tipped. Back legs lifted, and instead of falling, it seemed to tip through something. A split-second shimmer in the air, barely visible in the heat haze, and Caleb vanished like a whisper sucked into silence. No scream. No thud, no crunch of bones hitting dirt. Just that faint wooden clatter of the bowl toppling over, scattering a few wedges of watermelon across the porch. They landed with wet smacks, seeds peppering the dry boards. His mother came back outside. 10 seconds later, still talking to him, still smiling. Then she stopped. The porch was empty. The chair was upright again, rocking slightly. But Caleb wasn't in it. She stood still for a moment, confused but not yet afraid. Maybe he ran off to the hose spigot. Maybe he went around the house to chase that calico stray cat he always fed. Cheez-Its too. Then she saw the footprints. Sticky, bare footprints leading off the porch. Little ones. The kind left behind by watermelon juice and dust mixing together. They were clear and defined at first, heel, arch, toe, but they didn't go toward the spigot. They didn't go toward the cat. They went out into the dirt yard and across a dot and toward the back fence line that separated their property from the oil lease road and the mesquite choke draw beyond it. She followed them, calling his name louder and louder until it cracked her voice. Each step took her farther from the house and deeper into a silence that didn't feel like silence. The kind of hush that presses on your ears like you've gone too deep underwater. The kind that makes your breath sound too loud. But the footprints didn't make sense. They were too long. After the first few, they stretched. The stride widened. The size of the prints changed. What had been small childlike ovals widened, warped. Toes splayed. The edges of each print bled outward like the foot was melting or stretching mid-step. And then the prints stopped. Right at the edge of the draw. No sign of Caleb. No sign of a struggle. Just the last misshapen print pressed deep into a patch of baked earth, and then nothing. That's when she started screaming. The sheriff came out, along with 3 deputies and 2 K-9 units from Webb County. They canvassed the property, checked for signs of abduction. No tire tracks, no drag marks, no signs of forced entry or exit. Just a confused, frantic mother and a story that made no goddamn sense. The boy had been there. Everyone agreed. His cousin had been inside watching cartoons with the volume up too loud. His uncle had pulled out of the drive 10 minutes before it happened. Neighbors said they saw him earlier that afternoon riding around in a plastic tricycle, yelling about bugs. The watermelon bowl had fingerprints, DNA, evidence, but there was no boy and no scent trail either. The dogs, good dogs, reliable ones, caught his scent on the porch and followed it into the yard, but they started whining and backing away near the last few prints. Not from exhaustion, from something else. The handlers said they'd only seen behavior like that around bodies, not just dead ones. Violent ones. Still, they searched. Days passed. Then weeks. Posters went up all over Katerina, Asherton, and Carrizo Springs. News vans showed up for a while, then left when there was no new angle. Theories ranged from cartel kidnapping to a mountain lion, both absurd. No one steals a boy in broad daylight, without a vehicle. And there hadn't been a lion sighting in the area since '09, but people talked. And as time wore on, the stories started. Old dash timers at the diner spoke of the draw behind the Vasquez place. Sighed it had always been a little strange. Dogs didn't go near it. People reported hearing laughter out there at night. Not coyotes, human laughter. The kind that starts soft and gets louder as you walk away from it. Not one man, Hector Torres, swore he saw something years ago. Said back in '96, his nephew was playing in the yard when the sprinkler went out. He went to the side of the house to check the hose and saw a shape, like a shimmer of heat but colder somehow, just standing at the edge of the draw. It watched him, and when he blinked, it was gone. Nobody believed him back then. They did now, because a month after Caleb vanished, another report came in. This time from a ranch 2 miles north. A father and daughter were checking a fence line at dusk when they heard humming. A child's voice. The girl ran ahead, thinking it was another kid. She reached a clearing and froze. There, in the center, stood a rocking chair. An old cedar one. It was rocking. And beside it lay a half-eaten wedge of watermelon. Still glistening, still fresh. The father didn't see the chair at first, only his daughter backing away. Then he saw the footprints, dozens of them. Children's prints leading in circles, some overlapping, some stretching. They all led toward the middle and never back out. By the time they left the clearing, the humming had stopped. The air was heavy, and something followed them home. They never went back, and no one spoke of the boy again, except for his mother. She still sits on the porch. Every evening, same time. Sets out a bowl of watermelon wedges. places the chair just so, in the same spot where Caleb last sat. The porch is worn now, weather-beaten. The stain has long since peeled, and the boards grown under her weight. But she waits, because sometimes, when the wind dies down and the sun hits just right, she swears she sees a shimmer. Not heat, not air. Something else, and the chair rocks. Just a little, and something leaves a sticky footprint by the bowl. Always one. Always. Fresh. And always pointed toward the draw.